Imagine a world where the very foundations of writing, law, and civilization were first laid down 4,000 years ago. The Sumerians, a forgotten people, shaped the world in ways we still feel today, yet their story is one few truly know. The Sumerians emerged as one of the world's first great civilizations, their story unfolding in the Fertile Crescent between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. This land, rich in natural resources, provided the perfect conditions for the development of agriculture, which would become the cornerstone of their society. The rivers, both a blessing and a challenge, brought with them the floods that nourished the soil, but also the need for careful management and control. Over time, the Sumerians mastered irrigation systems, channeling water to sustain crops and support growing communities. This mastery of agriculture allowed them to move beyond subsistence farming, cultivating surplus food that could sustain a large population and fuel urban growth. As the Sumerians established their first settlements, they transformed from small farming communities into thriving cities. These early cities, such as Uruk and Eridu, stood as monumental testaments to the ingenuity of their people. The construction of complex irrigation systems, the building of walls and city centres, and the development of organised trade networks marked a shift from rural to urban life. The fertile land allowed for more than just basic sustenance. It enabled the rise of skilled craftsmen, merchants, and a class of religious leaders, creating a multifaceted society. The Sumerians didn't just rely on their surroundings for survival. They began to shape their environment in unprecedented ways. Agriculture led to the creation of surpluses, and with surpluses came the need for record-keeping, trade, and social organization. It wasn't long before the Sumerians developed the first forms of writing, cuneiform etched into clay tablets to document everything from trade transactions to royal decrees. These early written records, far from just functional tools, represented a leap forward in human communication and organization. The Sumerians were not only farming the land but also planting the seeds for what would become a lasting legacy in the history of civilization. The importance of agriculture cannot be overstated. It was the foundation upon which Sumerian cities were built, allowing a population to grow and cultures to develop. The ability to control and manipulate the land, making it yield more than it naturally would, provided the Sumerians with the stability they needed to focus on other areas of life. It fostered trade, social stratification, and even religious institutions. In turn, these cities grew into the political, economic, and cultural centers that defined Sumerian life. As the Sumerians cultivated their land, they were not merely growing crops, they were shaping the future of human civilization. The geography of their world, with its rivers and fertile soil, had given rise to a society that would become the cradle of innovation. It was here, in the rich soils between the Tigris and Euphrates, that the foundations of one of the earliest and most influential civilizations in human history were laid. As the Sumerians harnessed the fertile land between the Tigris and Euphrates, their settlements began to grow beyond small agricultural communities. The rise of city-states marked a monumental shift in their way of life. Uruk, Eridu, and later Ur became the centers of Sumerian civilization, each city-state developing its unique identity while sharing common cultural foundations. These urban centers grew in both size and complexity as their populations flourished, supported by the abundant agricultural production. The city-state of Uruk, often regarded as the first true city, stood as a symbol of Sumerian urban advancement. Its towering walls and grand gateways demonstrated the ingenuity and determination of its people. Urban planning became a key feature of these early cities, as careful thought was given to how streets and buildings would be laid out. The city's layout reflected the need for both practical functionality and symbolic expression. Within the walls of Uruk, grand temples and monumental structures rose high into the sky, created to honor the gods and showcase the wealth of the city. It was in these structures, such as the ziggurat of Ur, that the Sumerians expressed both their devotion and their mastery over their environment. The monumental architecture that characterized these city-states was not just an artistic expression, but a reflection of Sumerian values. Temples dedicated to various gods were the heart of every city, symbolizing the centrality of religion in everyday life. These structures were often the tallest buildings in the city, emphasizing the divine order and the power of the gods over human affairs. Around these temples, bustling marketplaces, homes, and public buildings were organized, creating a dense, thriving urban environment. With urban growth came the need for organization. The Sumerians developed complex systems of governance to manage the increasingly large and diverse populations within their city-states. Leaders, often seen as representatives of the gods on earth, took charge of administering the city, ensuring that the needs of the people were met and that trade, agriculture, and military efforts were coordinated. The construction of monumental architecture, like the ziggurats, required an organized labor force, a new form of social hierarchy, and a system of record-keeping that would eventually evolve into the cuneiform writing system. The expansion of these city-states brought with it competition for resources and territory. As Uruk and Eridu grew in power and influence, they began to engage in trade and warfare with neighboring city-states. This rivalry led to alliances and conflicts, which further shaped the political and social landscapes of Sumerian society. The growth of these urban centers also spurred advancements in technology, culture, and governance, as the need for organization and innovation became paramount. In the rise of these city-states, the Sumerians demonstrated their ability to adapt and thrive. They not only created the first true urban centers, but also laid the groundwork for the complex societies that would shape the course of human history. These early cities were not merely places of survival, but testaments to the human capacity for organization, creativity, and ambition. The invention of writing marked a pivotal moment in the evolution of human civilization, and it was the Sumerians who first transformed the abstract into the tangible with the creation of cuneiform. Born out of the need to record transactions and manage the complex affairs of city-state life, cuneiform script emerged around 3200 BCE in Uruk. Initially developed as a system of pictographs, it evolved into a series of wedge-shaped marks pressed into clay tablets, which became one of the most enduring legacies of Sumerian culture. At first, the Sumerians used cuneiform primarily for practical purposes. Merchants and administrators needed a reliable method to track trade, agricultural production, and taxation. These early records, often simple lists of goods, amounts, and transactions, were etched onto clay tablets using reed styluses. Over time, as the demands of urban life grew more complex, so did the script. It adapted to record not only economic exchanges, but also the more intricate aspects of Sumerian life, their laws, religious rituals, and history. One of the most significant aspects of cuneiform was its role in preserving the history and culture of the Sumerians. Kings and priests used it to immortalize their achievements and deeds, ensuring that their names and legacies would endure through the ages. The famous Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the earliest works of literature, was written in cuneiform. This mythic narrative, depicting the adventures of the Sumerian king Gilgamesh, conveyed profound insights into the human condition, love, loss, mortality, and the search for immortality. It is through such texts that we glimpse the spiritual and philosophical depths of the Sumerians, who pondered the same existential questions that continue to occupy humanity today. Cuneiform also played a crucial role in the codification of laws. The earliest known legal code, the Ur-Nammu Code, was inscribed in cuneiform and outlined the rights and responsibilities of the Sumerian people. These laws were crucial for maintaining order in an increasingly complex society, where social hierarchies, property rights, and justice had to be clearly defined and enforced. The script's ability to record these laws with precision and permanence made it an indispensable tool for governance. As cuneiform evolved, so did its role in Sumerian education and administration. Scribes, highly trained in the art of writing, became an essential part of the bureaucracy. Their work ensured that the flow of information within the city-state was organized, and that the vast body of knowledge ranging from religious texts to mathematical formulas was preserved for future generations. In the hands of the Sumerians, cuneiform was not just a tool for communication, it was a bridge between the present and the future. Through this script, they left behind a written record that would endure far beyond the life of any one king or kingdom. The written word would become the bedrock of human civilization, ensuring that the stories, ideas, and achievements of the past could be shared, studied, and remembered for millennia to come. Religion was the cornerstone of Sumerian society, intricately woven into the fabric of everyday life. The Sumerians believed that their gods and goddesses controlled every aspect of existence, from the forces of nature to the destiny of kings. The pantheon was vast and varied, with each city-state revering its own patron deity. Among the most significant gods were Anu, the sky god, Enlil, the god of wind and storms, and Inanna, the goddess of love and war. These deities, along with many others, were thought to live in the heavens, but also to wield immense power over the earthly realm, shaping the lives of the people below. The Sumerians viewed their rulers as intermediaries between the gods and the people. Kings, priests, and priestesses were believed to be chosen by the gods to perform sacred duties, ensuring the favor of the divine. It was not only a spiritual responsibility, but also a political one, as the gods were seen as the ultimate arbiters of justice, fertility, and prosperity. Rulers would often seek divine guidance through omens and rituals, consulting priests or offering sacrifices to secure divine will in matters of state. At the heart of Sumerian religious life stood the ziggurat, a massive stepped structure that rose high above the surrounding cityscape. These towering temples were dedicated to the gods and served as both places of worship and symbols of political power. The largest and most prominent ziggurats were found in the cities of Uruk, Ur, and Nippur, and each was dedicated to a specific deity. The ziggurat's monumental scale was designed to emphasize the god's importance, drawing worshippers to the temple where rituals and sacrifices were performed to maintain divine favor. Temples were not only centers of religious activity, but also hubs of economic and political life. They were repositories of wealth, where offerings of food, animals, and precious goods were made in the hope of securing blessings from the gods. The priests and priestesses who lived and worked in the temples wielded considerable influence, overseeing the distribution of resources and conducting the rituals necessary to appease the gods. These religious figures were often the most educated members of society, entrusted with the task of preserving sacred knowledge and writing down the stories and laws that would shape the future. The connection between religion and politics was unmistakable. Kingship in Sumer was seen as divinely ordained, and the king's duty was not only to rule, but also to maintain the favor of the gods through ritual and sacrifice. The gods' protection was believed to ensure the king's success in war, governance, and agricultural productivity. If a ruler's reign faltered, it was often interpreted as a sign of divine displeasure, and new rulers would rise to restore balance and favor. In Sumer, religion was more than just a set of beliefs. It was a guiding force that shaped society's values, laws, and everyday activities. The gods governed every aspect of life, and the worship of these deities ensured that both the spiritual and temporal realms were in harmony. Through their devotion and rituals, the Sumerians sought to maintain the delicate balance between human existence and divine will, ensuring that the gods remained benevolent and their cities prospered. The Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest known pieces of literature, offers a glimpse into the values, beliefs, and anxieties of the Sumerian people. At its heart is Gilgamesh, the legendary king of Uruk, a ruler of extraordinary strength and wisdom, yet flawed by his arrogance and tyrannical ways. The people of Uruk, suffering under his harsh rule, implore the gods to create a counterpart, a man who could challenge Gilgamesh and restore balance. In response, the gods create Enkidu, a wild man who lives among the animals, untouched by civilization. His encounter with Gilgamesh sparks a deep friendship, and together they embark on a series of heroic adventures that reshape both their lives and the fate of their kingdom. Through the companionship of Gilgamesh and Enkidu, the epic explores profound themes of mortality and the human condition. Despite his divine heritage being 2/3 divine and 1/3 human, Gilgamesh is forced to confront his own limitations. When Enkidu dies unexpectedly, the loss of his friend plunges Gilgamesh into a profound grief, propelling him on a quest for immortality. This journey leads him to the wise and mysterious Utnapishtim, the Sumerian equivalent of Noah, who alone has been granted immortality after surviving a great flood. From Utnapishtim, Gilgamesh learns that immortality is a gift reserved for the gods, and no human, no matter how powerful, can escape the fate of death. This realization forces Gilgamesh to reconsider his own nature and the legacy he will leave behind. He returns to Uruk, no longer seeking to defy death, but instead focused on building something that will endure beyond his own lifetime, a great city that will stand as a testament to his reign. In the end, it is not immortality that Gilgamesh finds, but the understanding that human greatness lies not in escaping death, but in embracing the values of friendship, wisdom, and the pursuit of meaningful achievement. The Epic of Gilgamesh is not just the story of one man's journey, but a reflection of the broader human experience. It wrestles with the timeless questions of life and death, the search for meaning, and the role of divine forces in shaping the lives of mortals. The friendship between Gilgamesh and Enkidu serves as a reminder of the importance of human connections, while the epic's exploration of mortality urges readers to find meaning in the fleeting nature of existence. Ultimately, the Epic of Gilgamesh teaches that, while we cannot avoid the inevitability of death, our actions, relationships, and legacies have the power to transcend time. In Sumerian society, kings were seen as both political leaders and divine representatives on earth. They were entrusted with the task of maintaining order, ensuring the prosperity of their people, and honoring the gods. A king's role went far beyond that of a mere ruler. He was the steward of the land and the intermediary between the human and divine realms. His authority was believed to come directly from the gods, and it was his duty to uphold divine law, lead the people in times of war, and oversee the construction of monumental projects, such as temples and ziggurats, which were not just centers of worship, but also symbols of royal power. Among the most famous of Sumer's kings was Gilgamesh, the legendary ruler of Uruk. His reign is remembered not only for the epic tales of his adventures, but also for his contributions to the city-state's growth. Gilgamesh was credited with transforming Uruk into a thriving metropolis, with massive city walls that were said to be the strongest in the world. His leadership in the epic, while marked by arrogance, ultimately led to the realization of the importance of friendship, wisdom, and legacy. His rule left a lasting mark on Uruk, and his name became synonymous with great kingship, his reign embodying both the strength and frailty of humankind. Another notable figure in Sumerian history was Lugal-Zaggisi, the last ruler of the city-state of Umma. Lugal-Zaggisi's reign was marked by significant military expansion, as he sought to unite the Sumerian city-states under his rule. His ambition, however, led him into conflict with the rising power of Akkad. His eventual defeat by Sargon of Akkad marked the end of Sumerian dominance and the beginning of the Akkadian Empire. Despite his fall, Lugal-Zaghesi's contributions to Sumer's political landscape were substantial. He was one of the last kings to attempt the unification of Sumerian lands before the rise of the Akkadian Empire, and his efforts demonstrated the fragile nature of power in Sumer, where rulers could rise quickly but were also easily toppled by both internal strife and external forces. The legacies of these rulers highlight the delicate balance of power in Sumer. Kings were expected to be strong military leaders and effective governors, but they also had to navigate complex religious and social expectations. Their ability to maintain the favor of the gods was often tied to the prosperity of their people, and their legacies were measured by the monuments they built, the peace they maintained, and the cultural achievements they fostered. While the Sumerian city-states eventually fell to the Akkadian Empire, the contributions of their kings lived on, their names immortalized in both historical records and mythological tales. These kings were not only rulers of their people, but were also the symbols of a civilization that prized both divine and earthly power. Trade played a central role in the economic success and cultural development of Sumerian society. The Sumerians were keenly aware of their geographical position between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, which provided fertile land for agriculture, but they also understood that the wealth of their civilization could not be sustained by agriculture alone. To fuel their growing cities, the Sumerians established expansive trade networks that stretched far beyond their immediate borders, reaching as far as the Indus Valley to the east and Anatolia to the north. These far-reaching connections allowed them to exchange goods, ideas, and technologies with distant civilizations, making trade a critical pillar of Sumer's prosperity. The Sumerians were among the first to develop a system of international trade, relying on merchants who facilitated the movement of goods between city-states and distant lands. These traders carried with them commodities such as grain, textiles, and pottery, but also precious metals, timber, and lapis lazuli, which were in high demand in Sumer. The valuable resources they imported were not found in the region's fertile plains, and their acquisition was vital for sustaining the Sumerians' luxurious lifestyle and religious practices. Lapis lazuli, for example, was used to craft jewelry and decorative items, symbolizing the wealth and status of the ruling elite. The trade routes passing through the Persian Gulf allowed Sumerians to connect with other Mesopotamian cultures, while their dealings with regions as distant as the Indus Valley introduced them to exotic products like beads, cotton, and spices. Trade routes, both land and sea, facilitated not only the exchange of goods but also the spread of cultural influences. The merchants who traversed these routes brought back new ideas about governance, religion, and technology, which were incorporated into Sumerian society. The influx of materials such as cedar from Lebanon and copper from Anatolia allowed the Sumerians to build monumental structures, further enhancing their architectural achievements. Moreover, the wealth generated through trade enabled the development of a complex administrative system to regulate commerce, collect taxes, and maintain law and order along the routes. Markets and trading hubs became integral parts of Sumerian city life, where merchants, farmers, and artisans came together to exchange not only goods but also knowledge. The success of these trade networks was not without its challenges. Sumerian merchants had to navigate not only the unpredictable natural world, with its flooding rivers and barren deserts, but also the political tensions between city-states. Trade routes often passed through contested territories, and rival factions could disrupt the flow of goods. However, despite these obstacles, the Sumerians' ability to maintain such a vast and complex trading system stands as one of their greatest achievements. Through trade, they connected their civilization to a wider world, leaving an indelible mark on the ancient economy and culture that lasted long after the fall of Sumer itself. The Sumerians were not only pioneers in creating one of the earliest urban civilizations, but But they also made lasting contributions in fields like mathematics, astronomy, and engineering. Their innovations provided the foundation for advancements that would shape the course of human history for millennia to come. Perhaps one of the most profound gifts the Sumerians gave to the world was their development of a base 60 system of mathematics. This system laid the groundwork for our understanding of time and angles, as evidenced by how we still divide an hour into 60 minutes and a circle into 360 degrees. The Sumerians used this system for various practical purposes, such as measuring land, calculating trade, and creating accurate astronomical charts. Astronomy flourished in Sumerian society, largely because of their reliance on the stars to guide both daily life and religious practices. The Sumerians were among the first to study the heavens systematically, recording the movement of celestial bodies and creating star catalogues. Their observations helped form the foundation of the zodiac, which later influenced the development of Western astrology. They identified the constellations, including the famous Orion's belt, and they divided the sky into a number of constellations that have survived in our own times. Their knowledge of astronomy wasn't limited to just observation, but extended to timekeeping. They created a lunar calendar that consisted of 12 months based on the moon's cycles, which became central to the Sumerian agricultural and religious calendar. Engineering was another area in which the Sumerians excelled. They engineered complex irrigation systems that harnessed the power of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, allowing them to expand agricultural production and sustain their growing city-states. These systems involved channels, dikes, and reservoirs, all designed to control the flow of water and prevent floods. In doing so, the Sumerians were able to cultivate the land and support a large population, which was crucial for the success of their civilization. Perhaps the most iconic of all Sumerian inventions were the wheel and the plough. The invention of the wheel revolutionized transportation and technology. Initially used for pottery, it wasn't long before the Sumerians adapted the wheel for use in carts, facilitating trade and communication between their city-states. The wheel allowed goods to be transported more efficiently over long distances, making the movement of resources faster and easier. The plough, another essential Sumerian innovation, had a profound impact on agriculture. It enabled the Sumerians to break the tough soil of Mesopotamia, turning the land into productive farmland and increasing the yields of crops like barley and wheat. These inventions, along with their advances in writing, astronomy, and engineering, made the Sumerians masters of their environment, and their ingenuity played a crucial role in shaping the early foundation of modern society. Sumerian society was a complex web of interwoven roles, duties, and privileges, with a structure that was both rigid and deeply influenced by the spiritual, political, and economic needs of the time. At the top of this hierarchy were the priests and kings, figures of immense power and influence who shaped the laws and dictated the direction of the civilization. The king was not merely a political leader, but often viewed as a divine figure, chosen by the gods to maintain order and execute justice. The priesthood, which controlled the temples and the sacred knowledge, also wielded significant influence. They were responsible for conducting rituals, interpreting omens, and maintaining the favor of the gods, ensuring the prosperity of the city-state. Priests and kings often worked in tandem, with kings relying on the guidance of priests to legitimize their rule. Beneath the rulers and priests stood the artisans, merchants, and scribes, individuals whose skills were integral to the functioning of Sumerian society. Merchants facilitated trade and the exchange of goods across vast distances, linking Sumer with neighboring civilizations like the Indus Valley and Anatolia. Artisans were skilled in pottery, metalwork, and textiles, creating goods that were highly valued both within and outside of Sumer. Scribes, educated in the art of cuneiform writing, were the intellectual backbone of Sumer, recording everything from trade transactions to royal decrees, ensuring that history, laws, and economic activity were meticulously documented. At the lower levels of society were the farmers, who worked the land to provide the necessary food for the population. Though crucial to the survival of the civilization, they had little power or recognition, often bound by economic necessity and social expectations. They labored in the fields, tending to the crops that sustained the cities and ensuring the agricultural surplus needed to fuel the growth of Sumerian cities. Below them were the slaves, individuals who had little to no rights, often captured in war or forced into servitude due to debt. They performed menial labor, from domestic work to the construction of monumental buildings and city walls. Slavery was a pervasive part of Sumerian society, and while some slaves could eventually buy their freedom, many remained bound to their masters for life. Women in Sumerian society held a more complex position than might be expected in ancient civilizations. While the roles of women were largely defined by their relationships to men, they were not entirely confined to domestic spaces. Women could own property, engage in business, and even serve as priestesses. The role of women in religious life was especially significant, with the goddess Inanna being one of the most important deities in the Sumerian pantheon. Some women held positions of power, such as priestesses, who ran temples and controlled substantial economic resources. However, despite these privileges, the societal expectations for women were still restrictive, with their primary roles generally revolving around managing households and bearing children. Thus, Sumerian society was a structured, hierarchically organized system where each individual had a defined role that shaped their daily life and influence within the community. The divisions between the social classes were clear, but within this framework, there was room for both influence and mobility, particularly through religious and economic channels. The Sumerian economy was deeply intertwined with agriculture, with the fertile land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers providing the foundation for their success. The Sumerians developed a highly sophisticated irrigation system, which was crucial to sustaining their large populations. With unpredictable rainfall in the region, they had to find ways to manage the water resources effectively. Through an extensive network of canals, dikes, and reservoirs, they were able to divert the floodwaters of the rivers to their fields, ensuring a steady water supply even during the dry months. This control over water allowed them to cultivate crops year-round, making agriculture the backbone of their economy. The irrigation system was more than just a series of technical achievements. It was the very lifeblood of Sumerian civilization. The ability to water crops in a controlled manner led to an abundance of agricultural products, including barley, wheat, and vegetables, which supported both urban populations and the extensive labor force that built and maintained the cities. The surplus agricultural production helped fuel the growth of Sumerian cities, allowing them to expand and develop into powerful centers of trade and culture. It also led to the emergence of a class of merchants and traders who played a critical role in the economy, exchanging goods with neighboring regions. The agricultural surplus played a key role in economic development by providing the resources necessary for specialization and innovation. As farmers produced more than enough food to sustain the population, a portion of the workforce could be diverted from agricultural work to other sectors of the economy. Skilled craftsmen, scribes, merchants, and builders could focus on their trades, fostering cultural and technological advancements. The production of surplus crops also allowed for the rise of urban centers, where wealth from trade and resources could be pooled to create monumental architecture, such as ziggurats, temples, and city walls. Trade, both internal and external, became increasingly important as Sumerians exchanged their agricultural products and crafted goods for raw materials and luxury items not available in the region. Merchants transported surplus goods along the Euphrates River, linking the cities of Sumer with the broader ancient Near East, including regions as distant as Anatolia and the Indus Valley. This extensive trade network helped to create a thriving economy that was heavily reliant on agriculture, but also facilitated by the exchange of goods and ideas. The Sumerian economy, with its deep reliance on agriculture, allowed the civilization to prosper for centuries. Their innovative use of irrigation, coupled with the economic benefits of agricultural surplus, provided the stability and growth necessary to support their complex society. Through careful management of their natural resources, the Sumerians laid the groundwork for future civilizations in the region, proving that economic development could be sustained through the careful cultivation of land and the fostering of trade. In Sumerian belief, the afterlife was not seen as a continuation of earthly pleasures, but as a grim and shadowy existence. The Sumerians held a bleak view of what awaited individuals after death, shaped by their understanding of the gods and the forces that governed their lives. Unlike many later cultures that envisioned an idyllic paradise or a place of eternal peace, the Sumerians believed that the soul journeyed to the underworld, a dark and desolate realm known as Irkalla. This land of the dead was ruled by the goddess Ereshkigal and her consort Nergal, where souls led a joyless, insubstantial existence. It was a place where there was no return, a final resting place that offered no reward for virtuous lives or punishment for the wicked. The Sumerians did, however, practice elaborate burial rituals, which were believed to ensure that the deceased soul would find its way into the afterlife. The deceased were often buried with grave goods, including food, jewelry, and weapons, intended to assist them in their journey and provide for their needs in the underworld. Burial sites varied depending on the individual's status, with the most elaborate tombs reserved for kings and high-ranking officials. In the famous royal cemetery at for example, excavations revealed the remains of royalty and their attendants, suggesting a belief in sacrifice to accompany the deceased in the afterlife. The Sumerian concept of divine judgment in the afterlife was not as explicit as in some later religious traditions, but there were hints of it in their mythology. While there was no singular, definitive judgment as seen in later civilizations, the gods, particularly those in the underworld, were believed to have the power to decide the fate of souls. The Sumerians did not expect their deeds to be judged in a courtroom-like setting. Rather, they understood that fate was controlled by the gods, and those who had led virtuous lives were treated with respect in the afterlife. However, for those who had committed crimes or lived in sin, their souls were said to suffer the consequences of their actions, enduring hardships and torment in Irkalla. The idea of divine judgment extended to their understanding of the god's will in the mortal realm. Kings, priests, and individuals alike sought to maintain harmony with the divine to ensure that their actions would be favorably regarded in the afterlife. Temples and ziggurats were built to appease the gods, and rituals performed to honor deities were thought to guarantee divine protection, even in death. Ultimately, the Sumerian view of the afterlife served as both a reflection of their religious worldview and a guide to living a life in accordance with divine law. Although their afterlife was bleak, it was believed to be the natural continuation of life on earth, shaped by the will of the gods. This understanding of death and the afterlife reinforced the Sumerians' deep connection to their gods, emphasizing the importance of ritual, piety, and respect for the divine order that governed every aspect of their existence. Sumerian art and architecture stand as enduring symbols of their civilization's grandeur, showcasing their advanced technical skills and deep reverence for the gods. The most iconic examples of Sumerian architectural achievements are the ziggurats, massive step-like temples that towered over the cities. These towering structures were not merely religious monuments but represented the central place where divine will was enacted. Each city-state had its own ziggurat dedicated to the city's patron god, and it was believed that the gods resided in the temple at the top of these monumental structures. Ziggurats were built with vast resources, often constructed with mud bricks and sometimes adorned with stone to withstand the harsh environment. The impressive scale of these structures not only served to honor the deities, but also reinforced the power of the city-state and its rulers. They symbolized a connection between the heavens and the earth, a physical manifestation of the belief that the gods were watching over the land. Beyond religious structures, the Sumerians also constructed robust city walls, fortified to protect the city-states from both natural and human threats. These walls were often built with mud bricks, stacked layer upon layer, and featured towering gates that guarded the entrances. They were the backbone of Sumerian urban planning, creating organized and defensible cities that allowed trade and culture to thrive under the watchful eye of their rulers. These defensive walls also served as symbols of the city's strength and autonomy, marking the distinction between the city-state's domain and the untamed lands beyond. Sumerian sculpture, pottery, and jewelry further reflect their artistic expertise. Sculptors crafted detailed representations of gods, kings, and animals, often from materials such as limestone, alabaster, and copper. Some of the most famous works, such as the statues of Gudea, ruler of Lagash, depict a king in a serene yet commanding posture, dressed in royal garb, symbolizing divine favor and human authority. These sculptures were not merely decorative, but also carried powerful messages about kingship and the connection between the divine and the mortal world. Pottery in Sumer was a highly developed craft, often used for both practical and ceremonial purposes. It was beautifully adorned with intricate geometric patterns, depicting animals, mythical creatures, and scenes from daily life. The Sumerians mastered the art of pottery, creating finely crafted vessels, bowls, and jars for storage, transport, and ritual use. Their pottery techniques were so advanced that they created the potter's wheel, enabling mass production of pottery and enhancing the efficiency of the craftsman's trade. Sumerian jewelry, made from precious metals like gold and silver, was intricately designed and often adorned with gemstones. These pieces were not only personal adornments, but also held religious and cultural significance, often worn by the elite and used in religious ceremonies. The jewelry served as a visual testament to wealth, power, and divine favor, reinforcing the high status of its wearer. In every aspect of Sumerian art and architecture, there was a deep sense of purpose, from honoring the gods and kings to celebrating the achievements of civilization. These works remain as tangible links to a culture that sought to blend beauty with function, faith with strength, and the divine with the human. The Sumerians, ever intent on organizing their complex society, devised some of the earliest legal codes that would set the foundation for future civilizations. Among these, the Code of Ur-Nammu stands as one of the most significant, offering a glimpse into the legal structure that governed everyday life in Sumer. The code, named after Ur-Nammu, the king of Ur, is believed to have been created around 2100 BCE, long before the more famous Code of Hammurabi. Yet, its importance in establishing justice, order, and societal norms cannot be overstated. Unlike some ancient legal systems that relied solely on royal decrees or divine will, the Code of Ur-Nammu was a written compilation of laws that aimed to regulate both the actions of individuals and the relationships between the people and the state. Ur-Nammu, recognizing the need for a standardized system of justice, sought to formalize what had once been arbitrary decisions made by local rulers or tribal leaders. The laws were inscribed on tablets, giving the public access to the rules that governed their conduct, and offering a sense of transparency that would help ensure justice was applied consistently. The Code of Ur-Nammu emphasized fairness, with many of its provisions focused on property rights, contracts, and personal protection. The laws protected the rights of citizens, including their property and their personal safety. For example, the code addressed issues like theft, kidnapping, and damage to property, providing clear consequences for violators. Penalties for crimes were often not as harsh as those found in later codes, reflecting a more restorative approach to justice. For instance, while punishment for theft could involve monetary compensation, the laws also sought to ensure the well-being of the injured party. Focusing on restitution rather than retribution, the importance of the code went beyond merely regulating behavior. It was also deeply connected to the idea of divine justice. Kings like Ur-Nammu were seen as the earthly representatives of the gods, and the laws they created were meant to reflect divine will. This divine connection reinforced the authority of the laws and the king, as it was understood that those who upheld the law were, in effect, ensuring the will of the gods was followed. The code also established the role of judges, who were tasked with interpreting and applying these laws, ensuring that justice was served impartially and without bias. The Code of Ur-Nammu provided a foundation for the Sumerians' sense of order and justice, helping to shape the way the people interacted with each other and the state. In a society that was rapidly growing more complex, with urban centers, trade, and a burgeoning bureaucracy, having a set of written laws allowed for a more structured and predictable environment. It ensured that, even in a world where power was often centralized in the hands of kings and priests, the people were still given a framework of fairness and equality within the larger social order. Through these early legal codes, the Sumerians left an indelible mark on the history of law, laying the groundwork for the sophisticated legal systems that would follow. Uruk, often regarded as one of the first great cities in human history, stands as a symbol of Sumerian achievement. Located along the banks of the Euphrates River, it emerged as a powerful center of culture, politics, and innovation. The city's significance stretched far beyond its physical boundaries, influencing the course of Sumerian civilization and laying the groundwork for future urbanization across Mesopotamia. Its rise to prominence can be traced to its strategic location, fertile land, and the vast trade networks it cultivated, which connected it to distant regions. Founded around 4000 BCE, Uruk was not only one of the earliest urban centers, but also one of the largest and most influential in the ancient world. At its peak, it boasted monumental architecture, including impressive temples, city walls, and palaces. Uruk's most renowned achievement was its impressive urban planning. The city was divided into distinct quarters, each serving a specific purpose, from the religious district to the marketplace. The city's most famous landmark, the ziggurat of Uruk, was dedicated to the goddess Inanna and stood as a testament to the city's religious and political significance. These architectural feats reflected Uruk's role as a center of both spiritual and governmental power. As Uruk grew in wealth and influence, it attracted a diverse population. The city became a hub for commerce, art, and education, drawing in merchants, craftsmen, and scholars. Its economy was based on agriculture, supported by the sophisticated irrigation systems that allowed for the cultivation of crops in the surrounding fertile land. The trade networks it established allowed Uruk to flourish, as it exchanged goods such as textiles, grain, and precious metals with neighboring regions. The city's wealth, however, was not only in its material resources, but also in its intellectual achievements. The invention of cuneiform writing, likely developed in Uruk, revolutionized communication and record-keeping. This early form of writing helped solidify Uruk's role as a center of knowledge and administration. Yet, despite its early successes, Uruk's dominance was not destined to last forever. Over time, the city's influence began to wane. The rise of competing city-states, such as Ur and Lagash, led to political fragmentation, war, environmental challenges, and resource depletion took a toll on Uruk. The very systems that had once supported its growth, the irrigation systems and agricultural base, began to falter, contributing to a decline in the city's economic power. As trade routes shifted and neighboring states gained strength, Uruk's once thriving marketplaces and temples gradually fell into ruin. By the end of the 3rd millennium BCE, Uruk's power had diminished significantly. While the city continued to exist for several centuries, it was no longer the dominant force it once was. The decline of Uruk marked a broader shift in the region, as new centers of power rose to take its place. Nevertheless, the legacy of Uruk, with its innovations in urban planning, writing, and trade, would leave an indelible mark on the history of civilization. The rise and fall of Uruk remind us of the cyclical nature of history, where even the mightiest cities are subject to the ebb and flow of time. The rise of Akkad marked a significant turning point in the history of Mesopotamia. Located just north of the Sumerian heartland, Akkad was initially a small, relatively unimportant city-state. However, under the leadership of Sargon of Akkad, its fortunes changed dramatically. Around 2334 BCE, Sargon rose to power, uniting the various Akkadian-speaking peoples and leading them to conquer the Sumerian city-states. His military campaigns were swift and effective, leveraging both strategic alliances and superior military tactics. Sargon's unification of the region created one of the first empires in history, the Akkadian Empire, which spanned much of Mesopotamia, from the Persian Gulf in the south to the Zagros Mountains in the east, and from the Mediterranean Sea in the west to the borders of Elam in the east. Akkad's conquest of Sumer had profound implications. Although the Akkadians overthrew the Sumerian city-states, they were quick to adopt and preserve much of Sumerian culture. Sargon and his successors continued to rely on the systems of governance, religion, and trade that had been established by the Sumerians. However, they introduced important changes to governance, establishing a centralized imperial system that consolidated power under a single ruler, in stark contrast to the more fragmented city-state model that had dominated Sumer. The Akkadian kings, such as Sargon and his grandson Naram-Sin, ruled with the authority of divine kingship, a concept that borrowed heavily from Sumerian traditions but was further elevated by the Akkadians to reflect a more centralized and absolute form of power. The Akkadian Empire's influence on Sumerian culture was also profound. The Akkadians adopted the Sumerian cuneiform script, but they modified it to better suit their own language, creating what became known as the Akkadian script. This script was used not only for administrative purposes, but also for recording literature, laws, and treaties. One of the most significant pieces of literature from this period is the Epic of Gilgamesh, which, while originating in Sumer, was later adapted and preserved by Akkadian scribes, ensuring that the Sumerian literary tradition would survive even after the fall of Sumer. Moreover, the Akkadians helped spread Sumerian religious practices throughout their empire. While Sargon of Akkad claimed that he ruled with the favor of the gods, particularly the storm god Enlil, the Akkadian rulers also continued the practice of building monumental temples and ziggurats to honor the gods, much like the Sumerians before them. The Akkadian Empire's success in adopting and transforming Sumerian cultural practices helped to create a unified identity across the empire, blending the Sumerian traditions with Akkadian influence. Despite their initial successes, the Akkadian Empire eventually succumbed to internal strife and external pressures. Economic instability, military overextension, and invasions by neighboring peoples such as the Gutians led to the empire's collapse around 2150 BCE. Nevertheless, the legacy of Akkad remained in the region, particularly through its contributions to governance, writing, and culture. The Akkadian Empire, though short-lived, left an enduring mark on the development of Mesopotamian civilization, merging Sumerian traditions with new ideas that would influence future empires. The decline of the once great Sumerian city-states was a gradual process marked by a series of invasions, internal strife, and the growing pressures from neighboring tribes and kingdoms. For centuries, the Sumerians had flourished, developing sophisticated systems of governance, writing, and culture. However, by the end of the 3rd millennium BCE, their dominance in the region began to unravel. The first signs of instability came from within the city-states themselves. As Sumer became increasingly divided, rivalries between the cities intensified. The once unified structure, which had been held together by a shared language, religion, and culture, began to fracture as competing political and economic interests emerged. The urban centers, once thriving hubs of commerce and intellectual pursuit, struggled to maintain the unity and strength that had initially propelled them forward. Sumer's internal conflicts were compounded by the increasing threats from external forces. To the east, the Elamites, a powerful people from what is now southwestern Iran, began to assert their influence. They repeatedly launched raids on Sumerian territories, taking advantage of the weakened state of the region. To the north, the Akkadians, after the fall of their own empire, fragmented into smaller, often warring factions. These fragmented groups found it easier to invade and raid the Sumerian cities, which had already been stretched thin due to constant warfare among themselves. The city of one of the most important Sumerian centers, fell victim to multiple attacks, and its power began to wane. Meanwhile, to the west, the Amorites, a Semitic-speaking people, they were advancing into Mesopotamia. Their migration into the region marked the beginning of a new era in Mesopotamian history, one where the Amorites would eventually dominate and establish their own dynasty, notably through the creation of the Babylonian Empire. The Sumerians, already weakened by years of conflict and instability, found themselves unable to effectively defend their borders against these new invaders. Cities like Uruk, once symbols of Sumerian power, fell into disrepair and abandoned their roles as centers of culture and governance. The Sumerian decline reached its peak when the Gutians, a mountain tribe from the Zagros Mountains, swept through Sumer. The Gutians, known for their brutal conquests, inflicted significant damage on the already crumbling cities. Their invasions marked the final blow to the Sumerian city-states, which were already struggling with resource shortages, political fragmentation, and military exhaustion. The Gutians' invasion, while not as organized or structured as the previous invasions, was devastating enough to break the spirit of the Sumerians, who had seen their civilization slowly erode under the weight of these pressures. By the time the third dynasty of collapsed around 2000 BCE, Sumerian civilization had effectively ended as a political power. While the cultural achievements of the Sumerians, such as their writing system, literature, and religious practices, would influence future civilizations, the city-states themselves faded into history. The rise of the Babylonians and other emerging powers marked the end of Sumer's dominance, and the once thriving civilization was gradually absorbed into the larger, shifting tapestry of ancient Mesopotamian history. The rise of the Akkadian Empire under the leadership of Sargon the Great marked a pivotal shift in the history of Mesopotamia, blending Sumerian culture with Akkadian influence in ways that reshaped the entire region. Sargon's conquest of Sumer in the 24th century BCE not only brought about the fall of the Sumerian city-states, but also laid the foundations for a new era in the ancient world. His military genius and ability to unite various disparate tribes and cities under a single banner created the first true empire in history. Through this consolidation of power, Sargon's Akkadian Empire became the dominant force, signaling the decline of the once mighty Sumerian civilization. Despite the political upheaval, the Akkadian Empire did not seek to eradicate Sumerian culture. Instead, it sought to absorb and adapt it. This fusion of Sumerian and Akkadian elements is perhaps best seen in the way the Akkadian language gradually became the lingua franca of the empire. While Sumerian remained in use for religious and ceremonial purposes, Akkadian, the language of the Semitic Akkadians, spread throughout Mesopotamia, becoming the language of administration, literature, and diplomacy. The adoption of Akkadian was not merely a political move but a cultural one, with Sumerian institutions, art, and religious practices blending with Akkadian traditions. The Akkadian rulers, including Sargon himself and his descendants, drew heavily from Sumerian models of governance, administration, and religion. Sargon's centralization of power, for example, mirrored Sumerian kingship, with provincial governors appointed to oversee the empire's vast territories. These governors were responsible for managing the affairs of the cities, ensuring that the tribute and resources flowed back to the capital, Akkad. In return, they adopted Sumerian methods of record-keeping and bureaucracy, continuing the Sumerian tradition of using cuneiform script for administrative purposes. Religion also experienced a transformation under Akkadian rule. While the Akkadians brought their own pantheon of gods, they recognized the importance of Sumerian deities and incorporated them into their own religious practices. The Akkadian kings, like the Sumerian ones before them, sought to legitimize their rule through divine sanction. This synthesis of Akkadian and Sumerian religious practices was evident in the construction of temples and the worship of gods such as Enlil, who was revered both in Sumer and Akkad. The impact of Sargon's empire was not only political and religious, but also artistic. Akkadian art, influenced by Sumerian styles, embraced the intricate depictions of kings and deities, yet introduced a more dynamic and naturalistic portrayal of human figures. Akkadian sculpture and reliefs, such as those found in the famous Victory Stele of Naram Sin, depicted a sense of motion and divine intervention, blending Sumerian artistic traditions with new Akkadian elements. In essence, the Akkadian Empire did not seek to erase the legacy of Sumer. Rather, it built upon it, creating a new, hybrid culture that combined the best of both worlds. While the fall of Sumerian political dominance marked the end of one era, the Akkadian Empire carried forward many Sumerian innovations, ensuring that their influence would persist for centuries to come. Through this fusion, Sumerian culture, though no longer the ruling force, continued to shape the development of Mesopotamia and the ancient world. The Akkadian Empire, which had once unified Mesopotamia under a single rule, fell into decline by the end of the 22nd century BCE. The collapse was attributed to a combination of factors, including internal strife, political instability, and external pressures. Sargon's successors struggled to maintain control over the vast territories he had conquered. Moreover, the empire faced significant challenges from invaders, such as the Gutians, a mountain tribe from the east, whose incursions further destabilized the Akkadian heartland. These external threats, combined with a series of harsh droughts and crop failures, weakened the economic foundations of the Akkadian Empire, leading to its eventual downfall. The collapse of the Akkadian Empire opened the door for the resurgence of Sumerian culture, though it was not a return to the old city-states. Instead, the period that followed was marked by a brief but significant revival of Sumerian traditions and political structures. This resurgence was embodied in the rise of the third dynasty of Ur, often referred to as the Neo-Sumerian period. The founder of this dynasty, Ur-Nammu, took advantage of the power vacuum left by the Akkadian collapse to reunite the region. He established a new, centralized kingdom with its capital in Ur, one of the most prominent Sumerian cities. Ur-Nammu's reign is often celebrated as a period of political stability and cultural revitalization. He implemented administrative reforms, reinstating the Sumerian system of provincial governors and reorganizing the region into a more structured and efficient system of governance. The king also sought to restore the grandeur of Sumerian cities, focusing on monumental construction projects, including the famous ziggurat at Ur. This monumental architecture symbolized the return of Sumerian religious and cultural practices, with temples dedicated to Sumerian gods once again dominating the skyline of Ur. The reign of Ur-Nammu also witnessed the revival of Sumerian law and literature. The Code of Ur-Nammu, one of the earliest known legal codes, set the foundation for a just society based on fairness and equity, emphasizing the importance of justice in governance. The code, though not as detailed as the later Code of Hammurabi, reinforced the Sumerian commitment to law and order. Additionally, the arts and literature flourished once again. The Sumerians, through their scribes and priests, preserved their literary and religious traditions, which were incorporated into the educational curriculum. In many ways, the Third Dynasty of Ur represented a fusion of Akkadian administrative practices with Sumerian culture and religion, while Ur-Nammu sought to reassert the power and values of ancient Sumer. He did so within the context of a changing world. The return of Sumerian cultural practices and political structures after the fall of the Akkadian Empire highlighted the resilience of the Sumerian legacy. However, the Third Dynasty of Ur would face its own challenges, and just as the Akkadian Empire had fallen, so too would Ur, marking the end of another chapter in the long history of Mesopotamia. The rise of the Third Dynasty of Ur, however, remained a testament to the enduring spirit of Sumerian civilization, even as the region was once again on the cusp of change. The Third Dynasty of Ur, often considered Sumer's last great dynasty, marked a period of renewed prosperity and cultural achievement, beginning with the reign of Ur-Nammu. Ur-Nammu's rise to power followed the collapse of the Akkadian Empire, and he swiftly established a new kingdom with its heart in the ancient city of Ur. His rule was characterized by an attempt to revive the glory of Sumer's past, with a focus on restoring religious, legal, and architectural grandeur. One of his most significant contributions was the creation of the Code of Ur-Nammu, an early legal code that laid the groundwork for future legal systems in Mesopotamia. Ur-Nammu's reforms and construction projects, most notably the ziggurat at Ur, symbolized the revival of Sumerian culture, and his reign is remembered as a time of relative peace and stability in the region. Following Ur-Nammu's death, his son Shulgi ascended to the throne, further solidifying the power of the Third Dynasty of Ur. Shulgi's reign, which spanned nearly 5 decades, was marked by military success, cultural patronage, and administrative efficiency. Under his leadership, Ur reached the height of its power, dominating not only Sumer, but also the surrounding regions. Shulgi consolidated his control over the Tigris-Euphrates Valley, creating a centralized government that managed the kingdom's vast territories. He expanded Ur's influence through military campaigns and diplomatic marriages, further embedding the dynasty's power into the fabric of Mesopotamian politics. Shulgi was also an ardent patron of the arts, commissioning numerous works of literature and poetry. His reign is often considered a cultural renaissance for the Sumerians, as scribes and priests preserved and expanded upon the rich tradition of Sumerian writing and religious practice. Shulgi's own autobiographical inscriptions, which he had inscribed on clay tablets, reflected his larger-than-life persona and his belief in his divine right to rule. These inscriptions portrayed him not only as a king but also as a godlike figure, further reinforcing the centrality of the monarchy to Sumerian society. Despite these achievements, the Third Dynasty of Ur began to show signs of strain in the later years of Shulgi's reign. The vast administrative system he established proved increasingly difficult to manage, and the kingdom faced challenges from both internal dissent and external invaders. The weakening of the central government, combined with pressure from nomadic tribes like the Elamites, eventually led to the decline of the dynasty. After Shulgi's death, the stability of the Third Dynasty crumbled, and Ur was unable to withstand the growing external pressures. By the time of the dynasty's final collapse in the 19th century BCE, Sumer's political landscape had shifted. The once great city of Ur after serving as the beacon of Sumerian culture and power, fell to invaders, marking the end of Sumer's political dominance. The fall of the third dynasty of Ur signified the closure of an era in Mesopotamian history, but the legacy of Ur-Nammu and Shulgi endured in the cultural and legal contributions they left behind, shaping the future of the region long after their kingdom had disappeared from the map. The final fall of Sumer came not through a single catastrophic event, but rather through a gradual erosion of power. As internal strife and external pressures mounted, the Amorites, a Semitic people from the western regions, played a central role in this transition. Over time, they infiltrated Sumerian city-states, establishing themselves within the political and military structures of the region. As their influence grew, the Amorites took advantage of the weakening Sumerian city-states, which were fragmented by infighting and unable to coordinate a collective defense. Their conquest was swift, with the cities of Sumer, once the epitome of ancient civilization, succumbing to the advancing forces. Ur, the last great bastion of Sumerian power, fell to the Amorites around 2004 BCE. The collapse was not a result of a single battle, but rather a culmination of weakened defenses, economic strain, and the collapse of central authority. The fall of Ur marked the symbolic end of the Sumerian civilization, but it was not the end of Mesopotamian cultural and political life. Instead, it ushered in a new era in which the Amorites, with their strong military presence and astute political strategies, laid the foundation for what would become one of the most significant empires in the ancient world, Babylon. As the Amorites took control, they gradually replaced the Sumerian rulers with their own leadership. Yet, they did not erase the legacy of Sumer entirely. They inherited much of Sumer's administrative systems, legal codes, and religious practices. The Amorite king, Sumu-Abum, established the first Amorite dynasty in Babylon, and his successors would go on to create the Babylonian Empire. The transition from Sumerian to Babylonian control was not a stark divide, but a blend of cultural continuities and innovations. Babylon, under the Amorites, quickly rose to prominence as the new center of power in Mesopotamia, drawing on the legacy of Sumer while forging its own identity. The destruction of Ur and the decline of the Sumerian city-states paved the way for the rise of a new dominant force. While the Amorites were the immediate conquerors, the true cultural and political shift came with the establishment of the Babylonian Empire under Hammurabi, who would later codify one of the most famous legal systems in history. The fall of Sumer to the Amorites, therefore, marked the end of an era, but it also signified the beginning of a new chapter in the history of the ancient Near East. Babylon would inherit and adapt the achievements of the Sumerians, propelling them to new heights of influence, while the memory of Sumer's cities, laws, and innovations lived on, woven into the fabric of Babylonian civilization. The rise of Babylon after the fall of Sumer was not a complete break from the past, but rather a continuation and adaptation of the cultural, religious, and political elements that had flourished in Sumer. The Amorites, though they were conquerors, inherited much of Sumer's complex systems of governance, law, and spirituality, and in doing so, ensured that the legacy of Sumer would endure long after its cities had crumbled. Babylon, under the Amorite kings, adapted Sumerian practices and refined them, creating a civilization that both respected and reshaped its predecessors' achievements. One of the most enduring aspects of Sumerian influence on Babylon was the legal system. The Sumerians had established one of the earliest forms of codified laws, with rulers such as Ur-Nammu creating legal codes that sought to regulate every aspect of life. When Babylonian kings came to power, they adopted these legal principles, most notably in the reign of King Hammurabi, who famously codified one of the oldest and most complete legal texts in history. Hammurabi's code, while distinct in its approach, was rooted in the same sense of order and justice that had characterized the Sumerian codes, such as those of Ur-Nammu. Babylonian laws, therefore, carried forward the Sumerian tradition of written legal codes, with a focus on fairness, protection of property, and regulation of social conduct, all of which had first taken shape in Sumerian city-states. Religion, too, saw significant Sumerian influence in Babylon. The pantheon of gods that had dominated the Sumerian world was adopted and adapted by the Babylonians. Gods like Enlil, Inanna, and Anu, who had been central to Sumerian worship, found new roles within the Babylonian religious framework. Marduk, the chief god of Babylon, rose to prominence, but his position was often seen as an evolution of the Sumerian god Enlil, reflecting the continuity of divine power structures. The practice of constructing monumental temples, such as the ziggurat, was another direct inheritance from Sumer. In Babylon, the ziggurat continued to serve as both a place of worship and a symbol of the king's divine mandate, just as it had in the Sumerian cities of Uruk and Eridu. In governance, the Babylonians borrowed heavily from the Sumerian model of centralized rule, though they introduced their own innovations. The role of the king as both a political leader and a divine representative continued, with rulers like Hammurabi not only managing the state, but also maintaining the favor of the gods. The notion of divine kingship, deeply embedded in Sumerian culture, was seamlessly transferred to Babylon, where the king was seen as an intermediary between the gods and the people, a tradition that would persist throughout the history of Babylonian rule. The lasting legacy of the Sumerians in Babylon was evident not just in laws and religion, but in the very foundation of Babylonian civilization. Babylonian architecture, literature, and art continued to reflect the Sumerian influence, adapting it to the evolving needs and ideals of the Babylonian people. The Sumerians had created the bedrock upon which the Babylonians built, and while the Babylonian Empire would grow to surpass Sumer in many ways, it would forever remain indebted to the pioneering spirit of its ancient predecessor. The Sumerian language, once the dominant tongue of the ancient world, eventually succumbed to the rise of other languages, particularly Akkadian. Over time, as the power of Sumerian city-states waned and the Akkadian-speaking peoples established their own dominance, the use of Sumerian began to diminish. Yet, the influence of the language, despite its eventual extinction as a spoken tongue, continued to reverberate through the centuries, leaving an indelible mark on the cultures and languages that followed. The decline of Sumerian as a spoken language began around 2000 BCE, largely due to the political and military dominance of the Akkadians, whose language gradually supplanted Sumerian in most aspects of daily life and governance. The Akkadian Empire, under the rule of Sargon the Great and his successors, spread its influence far and wide across the region, and with it came the supremacy of the Akkadian language. However, Sumerian did not simply fade away. It transformed into a language of culture, religion, and administration. By the time of the Babylonians and Assyrians, Sumerian had become a language of scholars, much like Latin in medieval Europe, used primarily in sacred texts, royal inscriptions, and legal documents. Despite its decline as a spoken language, Sumerian continued to be studied and revered for its literary and intellectual contributions. Akkadian scribes, for example, would learn Sumerian to read and interpret ancient texts, particularly religious hymns, royal decrees, and legal codes. The Epic of Gilgamesh, which had been written in Sumerian, was translated into Akkadian, preserving its narrative for future generations. This process of literary and cultural transmission allowed the rich heritage of Sumerian thought to survive, albeit in a new linguistic form. Akkadian itself, while it borrowed heavily from Sumerian vocabulary and grammatical structures, evolved into a Semitic language with its own distinct features. Yet, Sumerian's influence on Akkadian was profound. The Akkadian script, for example, was based on the earlier cuneiform writing system developed by the Sumerians, though it adapted it to suit its own linguistic needs. The Akkadian language absorbed many Sumerian words, particularly in fields such as religion, governance, and law, and these terms became entrenched in the vocabulary of later Semitic languages, including Hebrew and Arabic. Even as the Sumerian language gradually faded into history, its legacy lived on through its cultural and intellectual contributions. The concepts and innovations that Sumerian civilization had pioneered, such as the development of writing, the codification of laws, and the creation of complex administrative systems, were all preserved and passed down, in part because of the linguistic framework Sumer had established. Sumerians' role as a language of learning and scholarship ensured that its influence would echo through the ages, even as it slipped from the realm of the spoken word. Thus, the extinction of Sumerian did not erase its legacy. Instead, it marked the beginning of a new chapter in the history of language, where its echoes would continue to shape the development of later cultures and languages across the ancient Near East. Sumerian, though no longer spoken, remained an intellectual and cultural touchstone for centuries, ensuring its place in the annals of history. The Sumerians, pioneers in many fields of knowledge, also made significant contributions to medicine and healing. Though their understanding of the human body and diseases was far from what we recognize today, their efforts in addressing illness and injury laid the foundation for future medical practices. Medicine in ancient Sumer was closely intertwined with religion, with healing often seen as a divine intervention, but it was also grounded in practical knowledge passed down through generations of scribes and healers. The Sumerians believed that many illnesses were caused by the wrath of gods or by malevolent spirits, and thus, healing was often sought through religious rituals and invocations. Priests and priestesses played an essential role in the medical field, using prayers, incantations, and rituals to invoke divine healing. Temples, dedicated to gods like Ninkarak, the goddess of healing, were also centers of medical care, where treatments often combined spiritual and physical elements. However, their understanding of disease was not entirely supernatural. The Sumerians also utilized practical remedies derived from plants, minerals, and animal products. Medical practitioners in Sumer relied heavily on a system of diagnoses and prescriptions that involved detailed observations. They recorded symptoms, diseases, and treatments on clay tablets, creating some of the earliest forms of medical texts. These writings not only describe treatments for ailments such as fevers, infections, and gastrointestinal problems, but also provide insight into the Sumerians' approach to surgery and trauma care. For example, the use of honey as an antiseptic for wounds and injuries was a common practice, a remedy whose efficacy has been confirmed by modern medicine. They also used other natural substances like oils, herbs, and resins to treat everything from skin diseases to digestive issues. One of the most significant contributions of the Sumerians to the field of medicine was the development of a system of diagnosis. Ancient texts reveal that healers did not rely solely on divine intervention, but also on observations of symptoms and physical examinations. They would examine the patient's pulse, temperature, and skin, much like physicians do today. Some texts even mention the use of diagnostics in diagnosing conditions like fractures and broken bones. Surgery was practiced on a limited scale, with doctors performing procedures such as trepanation, where a hole was drilled in the skull to treat head injuries or to release the pressure caused by brain swelling. Sumerian medical knowledge was passed on through generations, influencing future civilizations such as the Babylonians, Assyrians, and Egyptians. The Sumerians' detailed medical texts, many of which were copied and adapted by their successors, provided a framework for medical practices throughout the ancient Near East. Even the ancient Greeks, who later revolutionized medicine, were influenced by Sumerian practices, particularly in the use of herbs and other natural remedies. While their understanding of medicine was rooted in a mix of spirituality, and early empirical observation. The Sumerians' contributions paved the way for the development of more sophisticated medical theories and practices. Their legacy in the field of healing, though not as widely recognized as their contributions in other areas, is an essential part of the history of medicine and healing. Through their texts, remedies, and early diagnoses, the Sumerians showed the world the importance of observation, documentation, and practical treatment in the pursuit of health. The Sumerians, as one of the earliest civilizations, left an indelible mark on the cultural and religious landscapes of the ancient world, and their influence extended beyond their own empire. Many elements of Sumerian mythology and religious practices found their way into the sacred texts of the Bible, particularly in the form of themes, stories, and characters that bear striking similarities to Sumerian traditions. The connections between Sumerian beliefs and biblical narratives offer insight into the cultural exchanges that shaped the ancient Near East. One of the most prominent examples of Sumerian influence in the Bible is the story of the Great Flood. The Sumerian myth of Atrahasis, which dates back to around the 18th century BCE, tells of a great flood sent by the gods to wipe out humanity due to their wickedness. The hero of the tale, Atrahasis, is warned by the god Enki to build a boat to save himself, his family, and a selection of animals. This narrative bears remarkable resemblance to the biblical story of Noah's Ark, where God warns Noah of an impending flood and instructs him to build an ark to preserve life. Both stories share common motifs, such as divine warning, the construction of a large boat, the preservation of animals, and the renewal of life after the waters recede. The similarities between these two accounts suggest that the flood narrative, in various forms, was a shared cultural memory passed down through generations, transcending the borders of individual civilizations. Another area where Sumerian mythology and biblical stories intersect is in the character of the hero god, Gilgamesh. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, the titular hero embarks on a quest for immortality, seeking to understand life's meaning and the inevitability of death. His search and the lessons he learns resonate with the biblical themes of life, death, and divine sovereignty, while the biblical patriarchs, such as Adam and Noah, reflect different aspects of human existence. Gilgamesh's journey to seek meaning in an often fleeting and fragile world mirrors the struggles of biblical figures to comprehend God's will in the face of mortality. The Sumerian pantheon also influenced the biblical portrayal of divine beings. The gods of Sumer, such as Anu, Enlil, and Enki, held dominion over various aspects of nature and human life, much like the biblical God, who is depicted as sovereign over the heavens, earth, and all creation. The Sumerian deities were often portrayed as powerful, yet prone to anger and capriciousness, which is mirrored in the biblical depiction of God's wrath and judgment, particularly in the accounts of the flood and the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. These parallels reflect a shared belief in a higher divine authority that governs human actions and the natural world. The Sumerian religious practices, too, influenced the development of biblical worship and rituals. The Sumerians believed in the importance of temple worship, sacrifices, and rituals to honor the gods, practices that were later adopted and adapted by the Israelites. The concept of a sacred space dedicated to the divine and the offering of sacrifices as a means of communication with God can be seen in the biblical temple traditions and the rituals performed by the Israelites. In the grand narrative of the Bible, the influence of Sumerian religious thought and mythology is evident. The shared stories, themes, and divine archetypes speak to a common cultural heritage, one that transcended individual city-states and empires. The Sumerians' enduring legacy in the Bible serves as a testament to the interconnectedness of the ancient world, where myths and beliefs flowed across borders, shaping the spiritual and cultural foundations of future generations. The Sumerians were among the first civilizations to delve into the mysteries of the cosmos, creating a foundation for astrology and astronomy that would influence generations to come. Their keen observations of the heavens and their understanding of celestial bodies played a pivotal role in shaping their worldview. For the Sumerians, the stars were not merely distant points of light, they were manifestations of divine power and governed the rhythms of life on Earth. Sumerian astronomy was deeply entwined with their religious beliefs. They viewed the movements of the stars and planets as direct reflections of the will of the gods. The night sky was perceived as a divine realm, and the gods were thought to reside in the heavens, watching over the world below. The Sumerians identified several constellations, each associated with a particular deity or divine force. They also observed the movements of the planets, which they considered to be messengers of the gods, offering signs and omens that could influence human affairs. One of the most significant contributions of Sumerian astronomy was their system of celestial cycles. They developed a lunar calendar based on the phases of the moon, which was used to mark the passage of time and regulate agricultural and religious activities. The lunar calendar played a crucial role in organizing their society, as it dictated the timing of festivals, agricultural planting and harvesting, and even the dates for kings to receive divine omens. The connection between time and the celestial bodies was so profound that the Sumerians saw the cosmos as an organized and purposeful system, one that mirrored the order they sought to establish in their own society. The Sumerians' understanding of the stars was not limited to their religious practices. They also recognized the practical utility of astronomy in navigation and agriculture. Their early knowledge of the stars helped them develop sophisticated methods of tracking seasonal changes, which were essential for successful farming. By observing the heliacal rising and setting of specific stars, the Sumerians could determine the best times for planting and harvesting crops, ensuring that their society remained well-fed and prosperous. Moreover, Sumerian astrology extended beyond practical purposes. It was intricately tied to their belief in divine intervention in the lives of individuals. The Sumerians created a complex system of astrology, using the positions of the planets and stars to predict events and guide decisions. They believed that the movements of the heavens directly impacted the fate of kings, cities, and even personal destinies. Kings would often consult astrologers and priests to interpret celestial signs before embarking on military campaigns or making important political decisions, as they believed that the gods could communicate their will through the stars. The Sumerians' influence on later civilizations, particularly in the realms of astrology and astronomy, cannot be overstated. As their knowledge spread through trade and cultural exchange, it was absorbed by the Babylonians, who built upon and refined Sumerian astronomical practices. The ancient Greeks and later civilizations in the Mediterranean world also inherited Sumerian methods of observing and interpreting the stars, adapting them to their own religious and philosophical frameworks. In many ways, the Sumerians' early work laid the groundwork for the development of Western astrology and the scientific study of astronomy. Their ability to connect the cosmos with daily life, to chart the heavens, and to interpret celestial events as signs of divine will, created a legacy that shaped the intellectual traditions of the ancient world. The stars, for the Sumerians, were more than just distant points of light. They were the keys to understanding the divine order and the mysteries of existence itself. The Sumerians, though known for their advancements in agriculture, writing, and architecture, were also a people shaped by the realities of warfare. As one of the earliest civilizations to form in the Fertile Crescent, their city-states frequently found themselves in conflict with one another and with neighboring tribes. Their approach to warfare, deeply intertwined with their political and religious ideologies, was a reflection of their need to protect their increasingly valuable territory and resources. Warfare in Sumer was not only about military conquest, but also about asserting divine favor. The Sumerians believed that the gods granted victory in battle, and this divine support was crucial to a city-state's legitimacy. Kings often led their armies into battle, believing that their success was an indication of their favor with the gods. The military was also an extension of royal power, a way to consolidate control over territory and to demonstrate strength to both their subjects and their enemies. The Sumerians' military strategies and innovations were essential in their survival and success. One of their notable contributions to military tactics was the development of the war chariot. Sumerian chariots, drawn by donkeys or onager, provided mobility and a strategic advantage in battle. These chariots, manned by archers or spearmen, allowed the Sumerians to strike quickly and retreat before the enemy could retaliate. The chariot's effectiveness in both offensive and defensive strategies made it an indispensable tool for Sumerian warfare. Additionally, Sumerian armies used organized formations with soldiers arranged in tight units for protection and coordinated attack. Infantry soldiers wielded spears, axes, and daggers, while archers played a crucial role in weakening enemy forces from a distance. The use of shields, made from animal hides or bronze, further enhanced their defense, allowing the Sumerians to withstand arrows and close combat strikes. Sumerians were also known for their use of siege warfare techniques. They constructed battering rams and other siege equipment to break through city walls, a necessary tactic given the fortified cities that dotted Sumer's landscape. Mercenaries, often hired from neighboring regions, played an important role in Sumerian conflicts. These soldiers, skilled in warfare but not loyal to any particular city-state, were brought in when additional manpower was needed. Mercenaries were particularly useful in times of prolonged conflict when the demand for soldiers exceeded the city's ability to supply them. Their presence in the Sumerian military highlights the often transitory nature of alliances and the pragmatic approach the Sumerians took toward warfare. Mercenaries were sometimes paid in land or goods, adding an economic layer to their role in battle. The Sumerians were also quick to recognize the importance of logistics in warfare. Maintaining supply lines for food, weapons, and armor was essential for sustaining military campaigns, particularly during long sieges or expeditions. The Sumerians ensured that their armies were well supplied, enabling them to continue fighting for extended periods. However, the demands of warfare were not without their tolls. Continuous military campaigns drained the resources of the city-states, and the destruction caused by war often led to economic hardship for the populations left behind. Despite their advancements in military tactics, the Sumerian city-states were often vulnerable to outside invaders, and the constant cycle of warfare ultimately led to the weakening of their power. Their military innovations, however, were passed down through the ages, influencing subsequent empires and shaping the future of warfare in the ancient world. Through their armies and their strategic innovations, the Sumerians left a lasting legacy in the art of war. In Sumer, the ability to read and write was more than just a practical skill. It was the foundation of their society and culture. The Sumerians understood that literacy was essential, not only for keeping records, but also for preserving the knowledge and traditions of their civilization. It was in the hands of the scribes, a class of educated professionals, that Sumer's history, laws, and religious texts were documented and passed down through generations. Scribes were highly respected in Sumerian society. They were responsible for recording transactions, laws, treaties, and royal decrees. The importance of scribes lay not only in their ability to write, but also in their understanding of how to use written language to organize and manage the complexities of an expanding society. They were the administrative backbone of Sumer, working for kings, priests, and merchants alike. In this way, scribes played an essential role in the smooth functioning of Sumerian life, ensuring that agreements were honored and that history was preserved. It was through their meticulous work that the stories of Sumer's rulers and the deeds of its gods were made immortal. Scribal schools, known as edubas, were the heart of Sumerian education. Young boys, typically from well-off families, attended these schools to learn the cuneiform script. The curriculum was rigorous, focusing not only on writing but also on mathematics, religion, and the practicalities of running a state. Sumerian education was deeply intertwined with the needs of the state, producing individuals who could manage taxes, trade, and even the extensive legal systems of the city-states. Over time, these schools became the institutions through which literacy spread, though it remained largely exclusive to the elite classes. The significance of written records in Sumerian society cannot be overstated. In a world where oral traditions prevailed, the Sumerians understood that writing could secure the continuity of knowledge across generations. Laws, such as the famous Code of Ur-Nammu, were inscribed on clay tablets to ensure they were not lost to time. These records were essential in maintaining order, as they provided clear and unambiguous rules that could be referenced whenever needed. The written word also enabled the Sumerians to record economic transactions, keeping track of grain supplies, livestock, and trade agreements, and thereby supporting the vast trade networks that defined the civilization. In religious life, written records took on a sacred significance. The Sumerians recorded their myths, hymns, and rituals, preserving their belief systems for posterity. Texts like the Epic of Gilgamesh are among the earliest literary works in human history, a testament to the Sumerians' sophisticated storytelling and their understanding of the human condition. The written word became an instrument not just for communication, but for the transmission of culture itself, preserving the beliefs, practices, and aspirations of the Sumerian people. In essence, the Sumerians' devotion to literacy was one of the defining features of their civilization. Through their scribes and schools, they created a lasting legacy of knowledge, governance, and culture. This commitment to written records not only maintained the structure of their society, but also ensured that Sumer's influence would endure far beyond its own time, shaping the future of writing and education in the ancient world. The Sumerians were not only pioneers in the development of writing, but also in the art of storytelling. They understood the power of narrative to convey ideas, preserve history, and explore the complexities of human existence. From the earliest clay tablets, Sumerian literature began to emerge as a form of both entertainment and intellectual exploration, providing future generations with some of the most enduring works of ancient literature. One of the most notable contributions to world literature from Sumer is the Epic of Gilgamesh, which stands as one of the oldest surviving works in human history. Written in cuneiform and recorded on clay tablets, this epic tale follows the journey of Gilgamesh, the king of Uruk, and his quest for immortality. Alongside his companion, Enkidu, Gilgamesh faces a series of trials, encounters gods, and confronts the harsh realities of mortality. The epic delves deeply into themes of friendship, death, the search for meaning, and the inevitability of human limitations. It is a story that, while rooted in the Sumerian worldview, resonates with timeless human emotions and concerns, making it a profound precursor to later literary traditions. The influence of the Epic of Gilgamesh is far-reaching. Its exploration of themes like the quest for knowledge, divine intervention, and the human struggle with mortality echoes throughout later works of literature, including the biblical stories of Noah's flood, which share striking parallels with the flood narrative in the Epic of Gilgamesh. The epic's themes, its narrative structure, and its profound exploration of the human condition would go on to shape the literature of successive civilizations, influencing the Greeks, Romans, and later Western writers who grappled with similar existential questions. Sumerian storytelling was not limited to epics like Gilgamesh. It also included a wide range of poems, myths, and hymns that expressed the religious and cultural beliefs of the Sumerians. The Sumerians used poetry to honor their gods and to give voice to their cosmological views. Hymns to the gods, such as those written for the goddess Inanna, are some of the earliest examples of lyrical poetry. These works not only celebrated divine figures, but also sought to connect the mortal and divine realms, making the spiritual tangible through the power of poetic expression. The art of storytelling in Sumer was also a means of preserving history. Sumerians recorded the exploits of their kings and rulers in epic forms, embedding political narratives into mythic structures. These royal inscriptions, often carved into stone or written on clay tablets, conveyed not just the deeds of rulers, but also their relationships with the gods and their role in maintaining order and harmony in the world. Through these rich and varied forms of storytelling, the Sumerians laid the foundations for much of what we consider the literary tradition today. Their stories provided a bridge between the divine and the mortal, the mythic and the real, and offered an early example of literature's power to reflect and shape human society. Sumerian literature, particularly the Epic of Gilgamesh, would inspire generations of writers and thinkers, marking the beginning of a literary journey that continues to resonate with audiences worldwide. In the heart of Sumerian civilization, the complex systems of governance and law played an essential role in maintaining order and stability. The Sumerians were not only pioneers in agriculture, writing, and religion, but also in the creation of one of the earliest known bureaucratic structures. This system, which combined legal codes with administrative oversight, became the backbone of Sumerian society, ensuring the smooth functioning of their city-states. The Sumerians understood that to manage their growing cities and diverse populations, they needed clear regulations and organized systems of governance. This led to the establishment of a detailed legal framework, which was codified in the form of legal texts. One of the earliest and most significant examples of this is the Code of Ur-Nammu, created around 2100 BCE. This legal code provided a comprehensive set of laws that governed many aspects of Sumerian life. From family matters and property rights to criminal justice, the laws were written in cuneiform on clay tablets, making them accessible and permanent, and they ensured that justice was applied consistently. The Code of Ur-Nammu is significant not only because of its early appearance in history, but also because of its focus on fairness and the protection of the weak. Unlike some later codes that focused heavily on retribution, the Sumerian laws emphasized compensation and restitution. Punishments for offenses such as theft or bodily harm were often financial, ensuring that the victim was compensated rather than simply seeking vengeance. This legal approach reflects the Sumerians' desire to maintain social harmony, where justice was not only about punishment but about restoring balance. At the core of Sumer's bureaucratic system were the scribes, who played a critical role in ensuring that laws were recorded, communicated, and implemented. These scribes were highly educated individuals who operated as the intermediaries between the rulers, the laws, and the people. They were responsible for documenting official decrees, contracts, and agreements, ensuring that everyone was held accountable to the law. Their work was not limited to legal matters, but also encompassed the recording of administrative data, such as the collection of taxes, distribution of food, and management of state resources. The role of bureaucracy in Sumerian society extended beyond the legal domain into everyday governance. At the top of the administrative hierarchy were the king and high-ranking officials who ensured that the city-state's policies were enacted. Beneath them, a class of lower-level bureaucrats, including governors, tax collectors, and military officers, managed the day-to-day affairs of the cities. These individuals were entrusted with upholding the laws and regulations and maintaining stability, particularly as the Sumerian city-states grew larger and more complex. The Sumerian bureaucracy was integral to the functioning of society. It allowed for the regulation of trade, taxation, and military service, and it played a key role in organizing labor for the construction of monumental projects like ziggurats. Through the establishment of these systems, the Sumerians laid the groundwork for future civilizations, showing how law and bureaucracy could work together to create a stable, functioning society. Their legal and administrative innovations would influence not only the subsequent Mesopotamian civilizations, but also cultures across the world for millennia to come. In Sumerian society, women held a significant yet complex role, shaped by the cultural, religious, and political framework of the time. Though Sumer was predominantly a patriarchal society, women were far from powerless. They occupied crucial roles within the family, in religious institutions, and, in certain instances, within political spheres. Within the family, Sumerian women were primarily responsible for domestic duties, including managing the household, raising children, and overseeing the day-to-day activities that ensured the family's survival. However, their roles extended beyond these boundaries. Women had the right to own property, engage in trade, and inherit land, which was a remarkable feature of Sumerian society. These rights, though often limited by the dominance of male figures, gave women a measure of economic autonomy that was rare in many other ancient civilizations. Religion provided another avenue for women to exert influence. The Sumerians worshipped a pantheon of gods and goddesses, many of whom were associated with fertility, agriculture, and the natural world. As a result, women were central to religious rituals and practices. The most prominent female deity in the Sumerian pantheon was Inanna, the goddess of love, beauty, and warfare. Inanna was not only a central figure in religious worship, but also represented the strength and complexity of women in Sumerian society. Her worship involved temple rituals that were often overseen by high priestesses. These priestesses held considerable sway in both religious and social matters, acting as intermediaries between the gods and the people. The role of a high priestess was one of authority, and some women in Sumer rose to great prominence through their service to the divine. Women's participation in politics was more limited but not non-existent. In certain instances, women held political power, particularly within royal families. The most famous female figure in Sumerian history is probably Queen Shub-ad of Ur, also known as the Lady of Ur. Shub-ad's tomb, discovered in the royal cemetery of Ur, revealed a wealth of treasures, suggesting that she was not only a high-ranking figure, but also a powerful one. Additionally, there were other women, such as Ninsun, the mother of the legendary hero Gilgamesh, who were depicted in literature as powerful and influential figures. Though these women were exceptional, they demonstrate that, on occasion, women could hold political sway, particularly in the royal court. Despite these examples, the everyday lives of women in Sumer were often confined to the domestic sphere, with limited access to formal education and positions of leadership. However, the power women wielded within their families, religious institutions, and even in the political domain, albeit often indirect, speaks to their ability to influence and shape Sumerian society. Over time, their roles evolved, and the prominence of women in religious and royal contexts stands as a testament to their importance in the history of Sumer. As the centuries passed, the once thriving city-states of Sumer began to see their influence wane, overtaken by the rise of new powers in the region. By the early Twond millennium BCE, Sumer's political unity had dissolved, and the heart of Mesopotamian civilization shifted to the north. In the midst of this transition, the city of Babylon, a rising power on the Euphrates River, began to eclipse the Sumerian cities that had once dominated the landscape. The decline of Sumerian authority was gradual, a slow unraveling driven by internal strife, constant warfare between rival city-states, and the pressure of foreign invasions. The Akkadian Empire, which had once unified much of the region, began to fragment under the weight of its own expansion, and Sumer itself fractured into smaller, less cohesive entities. It was during this period of instability that the Babylonians began to emerge as a powerful force. Babylon, though initially just one of many regional powers, began consolidating its strength under the leadership of a series of strong rulers. The turning point in Babylon's rise came with the ascension of Hammurabi around 1792 BCE. Hammurabi, the sixth king of the first dynasty of Babylon, proved to be a brilliant military strategist and a shrewd diplomat. Through a combination of military conquest and strategic alliances, he systematically absorbed neighboring regions, including many of the former Sumerian city-states. Hammurabi's success was not just due to his military prowess, but also his ability to unite the diverse peoples under his rule, fostering a sense of Babylonian identity and strength. Hammurabi's most enduring legacy, however, was his codification of laws, known as the Code of Hammurabi. This set of laws became a symbol of the power of the Babylonian state and a hallmark of Hammurabi's reign. The code not only served to standardize justice across the vast Babylonian empire, but also reinforced the notion that the king was the divinely sanctioned enforcer of order, further legitimizing his rule. The legal reforms also helped to consolidate Babylon's power, allowing it to maintain stability and control over the newly conquered territories, which had once been home to the proud Sumerian civilization. The shift of power from Sumer to Babylon marked the end of an era. The cities of Sumer, once centers of innovation and culture, slowly faded into history as Babylon grew into the dominant empire of the ancient Near East. The final fall of Sumer came in 1759 BCE, when Babylon conquered Ur, one of the last great Sumerian cities, effectively ending Sumer's political and cultural dominance. The legacy of Sumer, however, did not vanish completely. Much of Sumer's religious traditions, architectural achievements, and innovations in writing, law, and administration were absorbed into Babylonian culture, ensuring that the essence of Sumer lived on, albeit in a new form. Babylon, under Hammurabi and his successors, would go on to become one of the most influential empires of the ancient world, building upon the foundations laid by the Sumerians. The Sumerians, though confined to the region between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, were far from isolated. Their influence reached across the ancient world, facilitated by a complex web of trade routes, diplomatic alliances, and military campaigns. As the first known civilization to develop urban centers, the Sumerians established extensive trade networks that stretched to regions as distant as the Indus Valley and Anatolia, leaving a lasting mark on neighboring cultures and absorbing foreign influences in return. Trade was the lifeblood of Sumer's interaction with the outside world. The fertile lands of Mesopotamia provided essential commodities such as grain, barley, and dates, which were exchanged for materials that the Sumerians lacked. Timber, precious metals, stones, and textiles were among the most coveted goods. The Sumerians were particularly known for their production of textiles, pottery, and grain, which were in high demand throughout the ancient Near East. The Sumerian merchants, traveling by boat and caravan, carried their wares across vast distances, making Mesopotamia a central hub in the ancient world's economic system. Their trade relationships extended to the peoples of the Indus Valley, where goods like lapis lazuli, a prized blue stone, were traded, and to the distant Anatolian regions, known for their copper and tin resources. This exchange of goods fostered a blending of cultural and technological knowledge. Sumerians were influenced by their neighbors, adopting and adapting materials, techniques, and even artistic styles. At the same time, they introduced innovations in writing, mathematics, and urban planning to those they interacted with, leaving behind a legacy that shaped subsequent civilizations. Sumer's diplomacy was equally sophisticated, with numerous city-states forming alliances or engaging in conflicts with powerful neighbors. The Akkadian Empire, under Sargon the Great, represents one of the earliest instances of Sumerian diplomacy with outside forces. His successful military campaigns brought many Sumerian city-states into a larger political and cultural sphere, unifying them under his rule. This period of consolidation allowed Sumerian culture, language, and innovations to spread further, influencing the broader Mesopotamian region. Through diplomacy and conquest, the Sumerians also maintained relationships with the Elamites to the east and the Semitic-speaking Akkadians to the north. The Sumerians were skilled negotiators, often using treaties, marriage alliances, and the exchange of gifts to solidify their power and maintain peace. Despite periods of conflict, these diplomatic ties allowed for the exchange of ideas and technologies. For instance, the Sumerian innovations in writing and record-keeping were incorporated by their neighbors, laying the groundwork for other civilizations like the Babylonians and Assyrians to develop their own sophisticated legal and administrative systems. The Sumerians' influence extended beyond commerce and politics to religion and intellectual thought. Sumerian gods, rituals, and mythologies were adopted by neighboring cultures, particularly by the Akkadians, whose pantheon mirrored that of Sumer, albeit with slight modifications. The Epic of Gilgamesh, a foundational text of Sumerian literature, would go on to influence later cultures, including the Babylonians and Assyrians, through their shared mythological traditions. Thus, through trade, warfare, and diplomacy, Sumer became not just a center of innovation, but a catalyst for cultural exchange. Their legacy is a testament to the interconnectedness of ancient civilizations, with Sumer influencing and being influenced by its neighbors in profound and lasting ways. The Sumerians were not only pioneers in writing and governance, but also in the measurement of time. As one of the earliest civilizations to organize daily life around a structured calendar, they laid the foundation for future systems of timekeeping that would echo through the ages. The Sumerian calendar, based on the lunar cycle, was intricately tied to the natural world, reflecting their deep connection with the cycles of the moon, stars, and seasons. Their calendar was a lunar system, with months marked by the phases of the moon. Each month began with the new moon, and the Sumerians counted the days of each month based on the moon's progression through its cycle. Since a lunar month is roughly 29.5 days, the Sumerians often faced the challenge of reconciling the lunar calendar with the solar year, which consists of approximately 365 days. This discrepancy led to the introduction of an intercalary month, or a leap month, every few years to bring the calendar into alignment with the solar cycle. This sophisticated approach to timekeeping ensured that the Sumerians could track the seasons with accuracy, which was vital for their agricultural practices. In addition to the lunar calendar, the Sumerians divided the day into smaller segments. The concept of dividing the day into 12 hours, and likewise splitting the night into 12 hours, was introduced by them. This division was based on their counting system, which was sexagesimal, or based on the number 60. The number 60 was favored for its divisibility by many smaller numbers, which made it an efficient base for calculations, and it still influences modern timekeeping. To this day, we use 60 seconds in a minute and 60 minutes in an hour, an enduring legacy of the Sumerians' ingenuity. The Sumerians also created a system of tracking the days of the week, using 7-day intervals to organize their lives. This was likely influenced by their religious practices, as they assigned each day to a particular god. This structure would later influence the 7-day week used in many modern cultures, including those of the Judeo-Christian tradition. Their methods of timekeeping were not only essential for agricultural planning, but also played a significant role in religious observance. Festivals, holy days, and sacrifices were all timed according to the lunar calendar, further intertwining their understanding of time with their spiritual life. The priests, often the scribes, and the most learned members of society, played a crucial role in maintaining the calendar and ensuring that the rituals were performed at the correct times. The Sumerian innovations in timekeeping and their calendar system laid the groundwork for future civilizations to refine and adapt their methods of measuring time. The influence of the Sumerian lunar calendar spread through the Akkadians, Babylonians, and eventually to other ancient cultures, shaping the calendars and timekeeping practices that continue to structure modern life. Through their careful observation of the heavens and their meticulous record-keeping, the Sumerians left an indelible mark on the concept of time. Sumerian architecture stands as one of the earliest and most influential achievements of ancient civilization. The designs developed by the Sumerians, particularly their monumental structures like the ziggurats, would leave an indelible mark on future architectural endeavors. These massive, multi-storied structures, built primarily for religious purposes, were designed to honor the gods and served as temples at the center of the city-state's political and spiritual life. The ziggurats were impressive feats of engineering, built with mud bricks that could endure the harsh conditions of the Mesopotamian climate. They were often constructed in a tiered form, with each successive level smaller than the one below it, creating a monumental pyramid-like shape that seemed to reach towards the heavens. The Sumerians' use of these towering structures symbolized their belief in the divine connection between the gods and the earth. The temples atop the ziggurats were believed to be the dwelling places of the gods, and only the highest priests could enter these sacred spaces. This architectural design not only served religious purposes, but also reinforced the central role of religion in the governance of Sumerian city-states. The ziggurat's grandeur was a statement of both spiritual devotion and political power, demonstrating the Sumerians' sophisticated understanding of architecture as a tool for reinforcing societal values. The influence of Sumerian architecture extended far beyond the borders of Sumer itself. The design principles of the ziggurat would inspire future civilizations, including the Babylonians and Persians. The Babylonians, who were heavily influenced by Sumerian culture, adopted the use of ziggurats in their own religious and administrative centers. The famous ziggurat of Babylon, often associated with the Tower of Babel in biblical tradition, was a direct descendant of Sumerian architectural styles. This structure, dedicated to the god Marduk, was built to mirror the Sumerian ziggurats, but was grander in scale, illustrating the Babylonian ambition to surpass their predecessors in both religious and architectural achievement. The Persians, when they rose to power in the ancient world, also looked to the Sumerian tradition of monumental architecture. While they did not adopt the ziggurat in the same form, the Persians constructed their own grand palaces and city layouts, often on elevated platforms. The use of monumental gateways, grand courtyards, and towering pillars in Persian architecture was undoubtedly inspired by the Sumerians' approach to combining aesthetics, functionality, and symbolism in their buildings. Furthermore, the Sumerian city layouts themselves had a lasting impact. Sumerians were among the first to design cities with planned street grids, establishing a model that later civilizations, like the Babylonians and Persians, would refine. The city of for instance, featured wide, well-planned streets, with residential and public spaces carefully organized. This focus on urban planning would influence the organization of cities in later empires, including the Roman Empire, where city planning would be vital to managing the growing population and complex infrastructure. The enduring legacy of Sumerian architecture is seen not only in the grandeur of their structures, but also in the way they integrated function, symbolism, and religious devotion into their designs. These early architects laid the foundation for the monumental building projects that would define ancient civilizations for centuries to come. The Sumerians showed that architecture could transcend mere construction. It could be a reflection of culture, belief, and power, leaving an influence that stretched far into the future. Sumerian religion was a rich and multifaceted system, deeply woven into the fabric of daily life. In its earliest form, Sumerians believed in a vast pantheon of gods and goddesses, each of whom ruled over specific aspects of the world, from the heavens to the underworld. These deities were seen as powerful forces that controlled the natural world and the fate of human beings. The Sumerians' understanding of the divine was inherently polytheistic, with gods like Anu, Enlil, and Inanna presiding over the domains of sky, air, and love, respectively. Temples were dedicated to these gods, and the ziggurats were built as a way to reach them, literally elevating the worshippers toward their divine rulers. Over time, however, the nature of religious practice in Sumer evolved. The complex, layered pantheon began to coalesce around central figures that represented supreme power and order. One of the most prominent figures in this shift was Enlil, the god of air, who came to be regarded as one of the chief gods in the Sumerian religion. His role as the ruler of the cosmos grew increasingly important, and it was through him that Sumerians believed they could gain divine favor and guidance. This centralization of divine power can be seen as a precursor to monotheism, a concept that would later come to full fruition in the monotheistic religions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. As Sumerian religious thought developed, the notion of a single, supreme god began to emerge more clearly. This shift was not abrupt. It evolved over centuries, influenced by changes in political and social dynamics. The centralization of power in the hands of kings, such as those from the third dynasty of Ur, mirrored the growing concentration of divine authority in one or two primary gods. This trend was reflected in the religious practices of later civilizations, notably the Akkadians and Babylonians, who borrowed heavily from Sumerian beliefs, but eventually focused their worship on Marduk, the god of Babylon. While Marduk was not entirely a monotheistic figure, his ascension to supreme status in Babylonian theology represented an early step toward the consolidation of divine power. This evolution towards monotheism continued in the ancient world, notably through the influence of Sumerian beliefs on the Hebrews. The Hebrews' early religion, like the Sumerians, was initially polytheistic, but over time, they moved toward a more exclusive belief in Yahweh, their single, omnipotent God. The Sumerian influence on the development of monotheism in Judaism is evident, particularly in the shared themes of divine creation, flood myths, and the understanding of divine authority over human affairs. In the broader context, Sumerian religious practices left a legacy that would be felt for millennia. The idea of a supreme, all-powerful God, the centralization of religious practice, and the concept of divine law all resonated in later cultures. The Sumerians may not have been monotheistic in the strictest sense, but their religious evolution laid the intellectual groundwork for the monotheistic ideas that would shape the course of history. In this way, Sumerian beliefs were instrumental in the transition from a world of many gods to a world defined by one. The Sumerians, often seen as the pioneers of civilization, made significant contributions to the arts, laying the foundation for artistic expression that would resonate across millennia. Their creativity extended to various fields, from sculpture and painting to music and architecture, influencing the development of cultural practices that would shape later civilizations. Music, in particular, held a vital place in Sumerian society. The Sumerians were among the first to develop a system of notation for music, which allowed them to create and preserve complex compositions. They constructed a variety of instruments, including lyres, harps, and drums, and music played a central role in religious ceremonies, banquets, and royal courts. The songs sung in praise of gods or kings were accompanied by these instruments, their melodies echoing the belief that music itself was a divine gift that brought people closer to the gods. In the realm of visual art, the Sumerians crafted exquisite sculptures, pottery, and reliefs that continue to be admired for their technical mastery and artistic sophistication. Stone reliefs, often depicting gods, kings, or mythological creatures, adorn temples and palaces, where they conveyed the power and sanctity of the divine and the ruling elite. The intricate details of these reliefs, such as the folds of robes or the expressive faces of the figures, show the Sumerians' keen attention to realism and human emotion. These works were not merely decorative, they were imbued with symbolic meaning, acting as both an aesthetic and spiritual representation of their culture. Sculptors often used materials like limestone and alabaster to create statues of gods and kings, with the aim of capturing the essence of divine and royal power. Sumerian pottery, similarly, demonstrated both function and art. Vases, bowls, and storage jars were carefully crafted with elegant designs and decorations, showcasing the Sumerians' skill in manipulating clay and their capacity for creating items that served both practical and aesthetic purposes. These objects often featured motifs from nature, including plants, animals, and mythological symbols, underscoring the Sumerians' reverence for the natural world and their understanding of its connection to the divine. The legacy of Sumerian art reached far beyond their own time. Their innovations in sculpture, music, and pottery were inherited by their successors in the Akkadian, Babylonian, and Assyrian civilizations, each of whom built upon the artistic traditions established by the Sumerians. The aesthetic principles of symmetry, proportion, and detailed realism seen in Sumerian reliefs were echoed in later Near Eastern art, as were their religious themes. The Sumerians' advancements in music also paved the way for later musical traditions, influencing the types of instruments used and the role of music in ritual and daily life. The Sumerians' contributions to the arts were not only a reflection of their own time, but a profound influence on the artistic traditions of the ancient world. Through their innovations, they left an indelible mark on the cultural and creative practices of future societies, whose art would continue to draw inspiration from the vivid, symbolic, and intricately crafted works of Sumer. Sumerian agriculture stands as one of the most profound achievements in human history, providing the foundational system upon which many future civilizations would build. The development of irrigation was the cornerstone of their agricultural success. Situated between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, the Sumerians harnessed the seasonal flooding of these waterways to cultivate crops in the otherwise arid land. They designed an extensive system of canals, levees, and dikes to direct the flow of water, ensuring that their fields were irrigated even during dry periods. This innovation allowed them to grow an array of crops, from barley and wheat to dates, which became staple foods for the Sumerian people. It is this mastery over water management that enabled the Sumerians to establish thriving cities, each a testament to their agricultural prowess. The Sumerians also refined farming tools and techniques, laying the groundwork for future advancements in agriculture. They invented the plough, which revolutionized the way crops were planted, making it easier to till the soil and increase crop yields. In addition to the plough, the Sumerians used sickles and hoes, tools that were crucial for harvesting the abundant crops that their irrigation systems allowed to flourish. They understood the importance of crop rotation, which helped maintain soil fertility and prevent land degradation. These early practices demonstrated an intricate understanding of the land and how to use it sustainably, ensuring that their agricultural system could support large populations for centuries. The Sumerians' agricultural innovations had lasting impacts on future civilizations. The techniques they developed in irrigation and crop management spread throughout the ancient world, influencing neighboring cultures like the Akkadians, Babylonians, and Persians. As these civilizations grew, they inherited and adapted the Sumerians' methods, expanding agricultural productivity across vast regions. The introduction of irrigation systems, for instance, was crucial to the development of farming in Egypt, India, and later in the Mediterranean basin, where agricultural surpluses fueled the rise of city-states and empires. Beyond the immediate agricultural techniques, the Sumerian approach to farming shaped broader social and economic structures. The surplus of food produced by these methods allowed cities to grow and specialize, leading to the rise of a complex division of labor. Sumer's wealth in agricultural produce allowed for the establishment of trade networks, as their crops and goods were exchanged with neighboring peoples, further spreading their innovations. These advancements in agriculture contributed not only to the survival of the Sumerians, but also to the prosperity of subsequent civilizations that built upon the foundation they had established. In the centuries that followed, the Sumerian agricultural legacy continued to influence the course of history. The efficient systems they developed paved the way for more complex and productive farming practices that supported the growth of powerful empires. Today, while technology has advanced far beyond the simple tools of the Sumerians, their influence in the realm of agriculture remains profound, reminding us of the remarkable innovations that shaped the trajectory of human civilization. Sumer's social hierarchy was a complex web of distinct classes, each with specific roles and responsibilities, creating a finely tuned structure that supported their civilization's development. At the top of this hierarchy stood the priestly and royal classes, followed by a burgeoning merchant class, and at the bottom, the commoners and slaves who sustained the entire system. The distinctions between these groups were stark, shaping the lives of individuals and determining their roles within Sumerian society. The priesthood held the most significant influence, overseeing not only religious duties but also substantial political power. Sumer's cities were not merely urban centers, they were religious sanctuaries. Each city-state was dedicated to a patron deity, and its ziggurat, a towering step pyramid, served as both a temple and the administrative heart of the city. The high priest was often as powerful as, if not more than, the king, and the priestly class controlled vast estates and the distribution of wealth. Religious rituals were not just for spiritual enlightenment, they were intimately tied to the economic and political stability of Sumer. Priests acted as intermediaries between the gods and the people, ensuring that the divine favor continued to bless their lands with prosperity. This divine connection solidified their dominance in Sumerian society. Beneath the priests were the kings, who were often seen as divine figures themselves. Kingship was hereditary, and while the king had military and administrative power, they were still expected to uphold the will of the gods, as interpreted by the priests. The king's responsibilities included leading armies, overseeing construction projects, and ensuring the city-state's well-being. While the king held great authority, they were still subordinate to the divine order. In some instances, like that of Gilgamesh, the king was even depicted as part god, further emphasizing the intertwining of religious and political authority. The merchant class began to rise as Sumer's economy expanded, bringing with it a new wave of wealth and social mobility. Merchants and traders played a crucial role in Sumerian society, facilitating the exchange of goods like textiles, grain, and precious metals. They became the economic lifeblood of the city-states, establishing trade routes that spanned vast distances, reaching as far as the Indus Valley and Anatolia. While merchants were not on the same level as priests or kings, they had considerable wealth and influence, and their role in the development of Sumerian culture cannot be overstated. With their wealth, they were able to accumulate land, establish families, and build their own networks of power, which set the stage for the growth of a more complex economy. At the bottom of the social pyramid were the commoners, who made up the majority of the population. They were primarily farmers, laborers, and craftsmen who worked tirelessly to support the upper classes. Slaves, who were often prisoners of war or indebted individuals, occupied the lowest rung of society. While they had no rights, their labor was essential to the functioning of Sumerian cities. The distinctions within Sumerian society created a rigid class structure, but it also ensured that the various components of society functioned together in a cohesive, organized manner. Social mobility was limited, and the wealth and power of the upper classes were maintained through hereditary and divine rights. This structure would shape not only the course of Sumerian history, but also influence the social systems of later civilizations, which would adopt and adapt these hierarchical models. Sumer played a pivotal role in the development of trade and commerce, laying the foundation for organized networks that would connect it to other ancient civilizations. Situated between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, Sumer's geography offered fertile soil, perfect for agriculture, which allowed its cities to thrive. However, its natural resources, particularly metals like copper and tin, were scarce. This limitation drove the Sumerians to establish far-reaching trade routes, connecting them to distant lands in search of materials they could not produce themselves. Trade in Sumer was not merely a commercial activity. It was a highly organized system that required detailed record-keeping and cooperation. The invention of cuneiform writing played a key role in this development, enabling merchants and administrators to track goods, transactions, and trade agreements with unprecedented precision. Trade goods, such as grain, textiles, pottery, and crafted tools, flowed through established routes that reached as far as the Indus Valley in the east and the Mediterranean in the west. The Sumerians exchanged their agricultural surplus for precious metals, stones, timber, and luxury items, creating a thriving market system that supported not only the elite, but the general population as well. The rise of city-states such as Uruk, and Lagash served as trade hubs where merchants and traders congregated to buy and sell goods. These cities became melting pots of culture and commerce, where people from diverse regions exchanged not only material wealth, but also knowledge and ideas. Goods were often traded through intermediaries, with merchants traveling vast distances, crossing deserts, and navigating rivers. The routes they followed were both overland and by sea, forming an intricate network that connected Sumer to the rest of the ancient world. Sumer's influence on trade extended beyond its borders. As one of the earliest urban civilizations, it established a model of commerce that would inspire neighboring regions, such as the Akkadian Empire and the later Babylonians. Its trade routes became arteries for the movement of goods and culture, linking Sumer to civilizations as far afield as Egypt, the Indus Valley, and Anatolia. Through these exchanges, Sumer not only enriched itself with foreign goods, but also introduced innovations in writing, art, and technology to other cultures. Furthermore, the role of Sumerian merchants was integral to the growth of a market-driven economy. These merchants, who often traveled long distances, formed associations and guilds, which helped regulate trade and ensure fair transactions. They also acted as vital agents of cultural exchange, bringing with them goods, ideas, and customs that would eventually influence the broader ancient world. Sumer's ability to establish and manage these vast trade networks was a testament to its organizational prowess, and it laid the groundwork for the interconnectedness of ancient civilizations that would persist for centuries. Sumer's scientific contributions laid the groundwork for many of the foundational principles that would shape future advancements in science, mathematics, medicine, and engineering. As one of the earliest civilizations to develop a complex urban society, Sumerians were driven by practical necessity to create systems and tools that not only addressed their immediate needs, but also set the stage for future innovations. Their understanding of the world around them, from the celestial movements to the anatomy of the human body, was both groundbreaking and enduring. The Sumerians are perhaps most famous for their advancements in mathematics. They developed a sexagesimal system based on the number 60, which remains embedded in modern timekeeping and geometry. This system enabled them to calculate time, divide circles, and record astronomical observations with remarkable precision. Their ability to divide the day into 12 hours and the circle into 360 degrees was an ingenious step toward creating a structured understanding of both time and space. These mathematical foundations would go on to influence later cultures including the Babylonians, Greeks, and beyond, who inherited and refined Sumerian mathematical knowledge. In the realm of medicine, Sumerians made significant strides in understanding and treating various ailments. Though their medical practices were based on a combination of herbal remedies, magical rituals, and divine intervention, they also developed early forms of diagnostic techniques and treatment methods. Sumerian texts document symptoms, treatments, and prescriptions for a wide range of conditions, from fevers to injuries. They even began the practice of surgery, performing basic procedures such as draining abscesses or setting broken bones. While their methods were rudimentary by modern standards, they laid the foundation for future developments in medical knowledge, influencing not only later Mesopotamian cultures, but also the ancient Egyptians and Greeks. Engineering was another area where Sumer made lasting contributions. Their ingenuity in developing irrigation systems allowed them to transform the arid land between the Tigris and Euphrates into a fertile and productive region. This early form of water management was crucial to their agricultural success and formed the basis for large-scale urbanization. The creation of canals, levees, and water wheels demonstrated their understanding of hydraulics and infrastructure. Sumerians also mastered the art of construction, building the first monumental structures like ziggurats, temples, and city walls. These architectural feats were not only practical, but also symbolic, reflecting their advanced knowledge of materials, geometry, and labor organization. Sumer's scientific contributions did not just stay within the confines of their own civilization. They spread across the ancient world, influencing later cultures that built upon Sumerian innovations. The mathematical systems they created were adapted by the Babylonians and later adopted by Greek mathematicians such as Pythagoras and Euclid. Similarly, their methods in medicine influenced Egyptian and Greek medical practices. The architectural and engineering principles Sumerians pioneered provided the foundation for Roman engineering and the construction of large-scale infrastructure. Sumer's scientific legacy is a testament to their ability to observe, analyze, and solve the complex problems of their time, and their innovations have echoed through the centuries, shaping the course of human development. The Sumerians were among the first to develop a complex number system, laying the groundwork for many mathematical principles that are still used today. Their numerical system was based on the number 60, a sexagesimal system, which distinguished them from other ancient civilizations that often used base 10 or decimal systems. This system was not only innovative for its time, but also laid the foundation for the mathematical tools that would shape later civilizations. The Sumerian number system was unique because it combined both a positional and a non-positional system. They used symbols to represent quantities, and these symbols were arranged in such a way that their value could change depending on their position in the sequence. For example, the same symbol for a number could represent different values based on its placement, similar to how our modern decimal system operates today. This positional value system allowed the Sumerians to perform more complex calculations and to record large numbers with relative ease. The Sumerians' choice of 60 as the base of their number system was particularly advantageous for a variety of reasons. 60 is a highly divisible number, meaning that it can be divided evenly by many smaller numbers, such as 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 12, 15, 20, and 30. This divisibility made the Sumerian system exceptionally useful for practical applications like timekeeping and measurements, both of which required the ability to divide units into smaller, manageable parts. The division of the day into 24 hours, the hour into 60 minutes, and the minute into 60 seconds, for example, all stem from the Sumerian base 60 system. This system's influence extended far beyond the Sumerians themselves. When the Babylonians inherited much of Sumerian culture and knowledge, they continued to use the base 60 system for their own astronomical and mathematical calculations. The Greeks, in turn, inherited much of Babylonian mathematics, which carried with it the legacy of the Sumerian number system. Even in modern times, we still see remnants of this ancient numerical system in our measurements of time and angles, where 60 seconds make up a minute and 360 degrees form a circle. In addition to the base 60 system, the Sumerians were also skilled in geometry and arithmetic, developing techniques to solve practical problems such as land division, trade calculations, and construction. Their expertise in mathematics allowed them to build the ziggurats, the large step pyramids that were not only architectural feats, but also symbolized their advanced understanding of spatial relationships. The Sumerians' ability to create and refine their number system represents a major intellectual achievement in human history. Their system of mathematics not only served their immediate practical needs, but also laid the foundation for the future development of mathematical thought. The Sumerian legacy in mathematics, particularly their base 60 system, continues to influence the way we understand and measure the world today. Sumerian architecture was characterized by its bold, innovative designs and its focus on creating monumental structures that reflected both religious devotion and political power. One of the most distinctive features of Sumerian architecture was the ziggurat, a massive stepped pyramid that served as a temple complex dedicated to the gods. These towering structures were not only a feat of engineering, but also a powerful symbol of the connection between heaven and earth. The Sumerians' approach to urban planning and construction set the stage for architectural developments in the ancient world, influencing cultures for centuries to come. The ziggurat, with its large, tiered platform and towering height, was designed to mimic the sacred mountains, believed to be the dwelling places of gods. These structures were typically built in the center of cities and were the focal point of religious and civic life. The use of mud brick, a material readily available in the region, allowed for the construction of these monumental buildings, while their sheer scale demonstrated the wealth and power of Sumer's city-states. The ziggurat at Ur, one of the most famous examples, stands as a testament to the sophistication of Sumerian engineering and design. As the Sumerian influence spread through the region, their architectural styles were adopted and adapted by successive cultures. The Babylonians, for example, inherited many elements of Sumerian design, particularly the use of ziggurats as places of worship. However, they added their own stylistic flourishes, such as the renowned Ishtar Gate, which was adorned with glazed brick reliefs of lions, dragons, and bulls. The Babylonians also expanded on the Sumerians' urban planning, creating wide, orderly streets and imposing gateways that evoked a sense of grandeur and divine favor. The Assyrians, who rose to power in the centuries following Sumer's decline, were deeply influenced by Sumerian architectural styles. Assyrian palaces, such as those at Nimrud and Nineveh, were built with massive walls adorned with bas-reliefs, depicting military victories and royal ceremonies. These palaces were designed to impress and intimidate, showcasing the Assyrians' military prowess and divine right to rule. The use of large courtyards, vast entrances, and high walls mirrored the monumental scale of Sumerian architecture. While the placement of statues and reliefs continued, the Sumerian tradition of using art to convey power and piety, Persian architecture, which emerged as a dominant force in the ancient world, with the rise of the Achaemenid Empire, also drew on Sumerian designs. The grand palace complexes of Persepolis, with their massive columns and intricately carved stone reliefs, reflected the influence of earlier Mesopotamian architecture. The Persians adopted the use of ziggurat-like platforms for their royal palaces, while the grand staircases and ceremonial gateways paid homage to the Sumerian tradition of creating awe-inspiring structures for both religious and political purposes. The legacy of Sumerian architecture, particularly the use of monumental design and symbolic structures, continue to resonate throughout the ancient world. From the Assyrians to the Persians, each successive civilization built upon the foundations laid by the Sumerians, incorporating their architectural innovations into their own urban landscapes. The Sumerians' ability to combine functionality with symbolism in their buildings left an indelible mark on the architectural traditions of the ancient Near East, shaping the way cities were designed and experienced for centuries to come. The city of Ur, one of the most significant and influential cities in ancient Mesopotamia, holds a central place in the history of Sumer. Its rise to prominence marked the peak of Sumerian civilization, while its eventual decline symbolizes the fragile nature of power in the ancient world. Located on the banks of the Euphrates River, Ur benefited from its strategic position, fertile lands, and proximity to important trade routes. It was a city of immense wealth and political influence, renowned for its impressive architecture, vibrant economy, and complex society. Ur's golden age began during the reign of King Ur-Nammu, who established the third dynasty of Ur around 2112 BCE. Ur-Nammu's rule brought stability and prosperity to the city, laying the foundations for what would become a powerful and influential empire. Under his leadership, Ur flourished economically and culturally, with advances in law, architecture, and administration. The construction of the Grand Ziggurat at Ur, one of the most iconic structures in Mesopotamian history, was a symbol of the city's grandeur and devotion to the gods. This architectural marvel was not just a religious center, but a statement of Ur's wealth and its place at the center of Sumerian civilization. In addition to its architectural achievements, Ur was a hub of trade, connecting the peoples of Mesopotamia with those of the Indus Valley, Anatolia, and the Persian Gulf. The city's wealth grew from its involvement in both local and long-distance trade, with merchants exchanging goods such as textiles, grain, and precious metals. The prosperity brought by these trade networks allowed Ur to become a center of culture and knowledge, with scribes and scholars developing some of the earliest forms of written records, which continue to provide us with valuable insights into Sumerian society today. Despite its early success, the fate of Ur, like many ancient cities, was ultimately shaped by the forces of war and political instability. The city's downfall began around the 21st century BCE, when the weakening of central authority and external invasions eroded its power. The Amorites, a Semitic-speaking people, began to encroach upon Sumerian territory, and Ur's position as a dominant power in the region was increasingly challenged. The fall of Ur-Nammu's dynasty and the subsequent rise of the Amorite-controlled Babylon marked the beginning of the end for Ur. The city's final decline occurred in the 18th century BCE, when it was sacked by the Elamites, marking the end of Ur's prominence in the region. As the once great city fell into ruin, the legacy of Ur and its achievements was not entirely lost. Its cultural and religious influence continued to be felt in the surrounding regions, particularly through its art, literature, and religious practices. The ruins of Ur, though abandoned for centuries, still stand as a testament to the grandeur of the city and its role in shaping the history of Sumer and the ancient Near East. The rise and fall of Ur encapsulate the story of Sumerian civilization itself, a story of remarkable achievements, breathtaking cultural advancements, and ultimately, the fragility of even the most powerful empires. Ur's legacy endures in the archaeological remains that continue to reveal the richness of its history and the profound impact it had on the development of ancient civilizations. The Sumerian Revolution was a profound transformation that shifted the ancient society from its roots as a collection of loosely organized tribal confederations to the rise of a centralized and powerful empire. This change, which unfolded over centuries, marked the birth of one of the earliest forms of urban civilization. The evolution from a decentralized system of governance to a unified state was driven by the need for more efficient control over agricultural resources, trade, and defense. and by the growing complexity of Sumerian society itself. In the early days of Sumer, society was organized into small, independent city-states, each ruled by its own tribal leaders and governed by the traditional laws of kinship and tribal customs. These early groups operated on the basis of shared religious and social bonds, where power was often determined by the influence of local leaders rather than a centralized authority. But as population numbers grew, the complexity of governance began to outstrip the capabilities of the old tribal system. There was a pressing need for more organization to manage resources, administer justice, and organize defenses against external threats. It was in this context that the first seeds of the Sumerian revolution were sown. Early rulers, such as Gilgamesh of Uruk and later Sargon of Akkad, began consolidating power and creating a unified political structure that transcended tribal affiliations. The creation of the first permanent urban centers, like Uruk and Lagash, marked a shift from a system based on kinship to one based on the need for centralized administration. This change was not just political, but also social, as it transformed the relationship between rulers and the governed. The kings who emerged from this shift were no longer just military leaders or religious figures. They became the center of an expanding bureaucracy that sought to control every aspect of daily life. This revolution was not without its challenges. The creation of centralized power brought about significant changes in how people lived and worked. Old tribal systems of mutual obligation were replaced by systems of taxation, labor conscription, and military service that were directed by a centralized state. The advent of organized bureaucracy led to the creation of written records, as scribes recorded the distribution of goods, the collection of taxes, and the enforcement of laws. For the first time, the Sumerians developed a truly hierarchical society, with priests and kings at the top, followed by merchants, artisans, and farmers. This centralization also had its social consequences. The rise of powerful urban centers created a greater divide between the elites and common people. The city-states began to form intricate social hierarchies, where wealth and status were increasingly determined by one's position in the state apparatus. Sumerian rulers often used monumental architecture and grand public works, like ziggurats, to display their power and reinforce the authority of the state. These structures were not just religious in purpose, they also served as physical representations of the centralized power of the state. The political and social transformations that came with this shift were the foundation upon which later empires, like those of Akkad and Babylon, would build. Through the establishment of a centralized government, the Sumerians created a model that would influence future civilizations for centuries to come. While the Sumerian revolution may have caused social upheaval, it ultimately paved the way for the rise of complex societies and the formation of empires in the ancient Near East, fundamentally shaping the course of history. The decline of Sumer, once a dominant force in the ancient world, was a slow and multifaceted process driven by both internal and external forces. By the time Sumer had reached its peak, the complex political, social, and economic systems it had built were beginning to strain under the weight of constant warfare, environmental challenges, and the increasing demands of maintaining a sprawling empire. Though the Sumerians had achieved remarkable advancements in agriculture, writing, and governance, the very factors that had once propelled them forward now contributed to their downfall. Internally, Sumer faced growing social and economic disparities. The rise of a powerful elite, consisting of kings, priests, and wealthy merchants, created a society where wealth and resources were increasingly concentrated in the hands of a few. This created significant unrest among the lower classes, including farmers and laborers, who bore the brunt of high taxes, forced labor, and military conscription. The constant need for military expansion, both to secure resources and to defend against external threats, further exacerbated tensions within the society. The heavy demands placed on the populace weakened the social fabric and eroded the once cohesive tribal bonds that had kept the Sumerian city-states together. The constant warfare between the various city-states of Sumer also played a crucial role in its decline. As the city-states became more entrenched in their battles for control over land, resources, and trade routes, their ability to unite against external threats diminished. Sumer was eventually overwhelmed by the rising power of neighboring states. The region's vulnerability to invasion became evident as the Sumerian city-states were unable to defend their borders or maintain their alliances. Externally, the rise of new powers like Akkad and Babylon was a significant factor in Sumer's decline. The Akkadian Empire, under the leadership of Sargon the Great, was a formidable force that sought to consolidate power across Mesopotamia. Sargon's military campaigns successfully subdued the Sumerian city-states, and his establishment of a centralized administration marked the end of Sumer's dominance. Akkad, with its capital at Agade, absorbed much of Sumer's territory and cultural achievements, while pushing the Sumerians into a subordinate role. Despite their fall, the Sumerians' influence continued to permeate Akkadian culture, particularly in religion, law, and architecture. As the Akkadian Empire eventually crumbled due to internal strife and external invasions, the Babylonians, led by Hammurabi, rose to prominence. Babylon, with its strategic location and strong leadership, quickly became the new power in the region. Hammurabi's law code, one of the earliest and most significant legal documents in history, incorporated many elements from Sumerian legal traditions, ensuring that Sumer's influence lived on in the new Babylonian Empire. While Sumer itself had faded from the historical stage, its legacies in governance, art, and culture were deeply embedded in the foundations of the new powers that would shape the future of Mesopotamia. Thus, the fall of Sumer did not mark the end of its contributions to civilization. Instead, it heralded the emergence of new powers that would carry forward its innovations, ensuring that the Sumerians' achievements would resonate through the ages, even as the empire that birthed them vanished into history. Sumerian spirituality was deeply woven into the fabric of everyday life, with their gods and religious practices shaping everything from governance to personal conduct. The Sumerians believed that the gods controlled every aspect of the world, from natural forces like floods and droughts to the more abstract matters of fate and morality. Their pantheon was vast and complex, with each deity presiding over a specific domain. Anu, the god of the heavens, ruled from the highest seat, while gods like Enlil, the god of air and storms, and Inanna, the goddess of love and war, had their own spheres of influence, reflecting the diverse and multifaceted nature of Sumerian beliefs. Religion permeated all aspects of Sumerian society, and its influence extended far beyond rituals and ceremonies. The role of the priesthood was central to maintaining harmony between the human and divine realms. Priests and priestesses acted as intermediaries between the gods and the people, performing elaborate rituals in temples and overseeing sacrifices and offerings to ensure the gods' favor. These religious figures were highly respected, often wielding political influence in addition to their spiritual authority. Many temples, including the grand ziggurats, served as both places of worship and centers of power, where priests helped govern and make decisions for the community. The Sumerians believed in a complex afterlife, though it was far from the idyllic visions of heaven seen in later religions. Instead, they imagined the afterlife as a dark and dreary existence in the underworld, a realm called Ir-Kala, ruled by the goddess Ereshkigal. The souls of the deceased were thought to descend to this realm, where they would lead a shadowy, foodless existence, much like that of the living, but without the comforts and joys of life. This belief shaped their views on death and burial, as proper rituals and offerings were seen as essential to ensuring that the deceased's soul could pass into the afterlife with at least some dignity. In daily life, religion was not just a matter of ceremonial observance, but also a framework for understanding one's place in the world. Temples were more than places of worship. They were also economic and political hubs. The priesthood not only provided spiritual guidance, but also oversaw the distribution of resources, including the management of land and labor. This system gave the priesthood significant power, as it enabled them to control the wealth of the city-states, which was often tied directly to temple land. Sumerian religious practices were also deeply entwined with the cycle of seasons and agricultural work. Temples hosted festivals and rituals that marked the agricultural calendar, celebrating the planting and harvesting of crops, which were vital to the survival of the city-states. Through these rituals, the Sumerians sought to ensure the gods' favor, believing that a prosperous harvest or a bountiful trade season depended on their ability to maintain favor with the divine. Thus, religion in Sumer was not confined to sacred spaces or isolated ceremonies, but was woven into the everyday actions of their people, influencing their politics, economics, and social structures. The Sumerians' devotion to their gods and their understanding of the afterlife shaped their worldview, creating a society where spiritual beliefs permeated every aspect of life and death. Sumer's influence on the ancient Near East was profound, with its cultural, technological, and political innovations laying the groundwork for future empires and civilizations. As one of the earliest and most advanced cultures in the region, the Sumerians established a model that would resonate across millennia. Their achievements in writing, governance, and urban development set standards that neighboring societies would adopt and adapt as they grew into powerful states of their own. The Sumerian invention of cuneiform writing was perhaps their most significant contribution to the region and beyond. This script not only allowed for the recording of laws, treaties, and religious texts, but also enabled the transmission of knowledge across generations. Neighboring civilizations, such as the Akkadians, Babylonians, and Assyrians, soon adopted cuneiform, modifying it to suit their languages. The spread of this writing system facilitated communication, trade, and diplomacy across the ancient Near East, creating a shared intellectual foundation that endured long after the fall of Sumer. In governance, the Sumerians pioneered systems of law and bureaucracy that influenced the rise of future empires. The Code of Ur-Nammu, one of the earliest known legal codes, established principles of justice and fairness that would echo in the legal systems of the Akkadians, Babylonians, and even later in Persian and Hellenistic civilizations. The Sumerian practice of appointing bureaucrats to manage resources and oversee the construction of monumental projects also shaped the administrative practices of succeeding empires. As these civilizations expanded, they inherited the Sumerian model of centralized power and administrative organization, adapting it to their own needs. Sumer's architectural innovations, especially the ziggurat, became a hallmark of the ancient Near East. These monumental structures, which served as both religious temples and centers of political power, influenced the design of later Mesopotamian temples and palaces. The impressive urban planning of Sumerian cities, characterized by fortified walls, wide streets, and organized residential and commercial districts, also provided a blueprint for future city layouts. The Sumerian urban model was emulated by the Akkadians, Babylonians, and Assyrians as they developed their own cities into thriving centers of commerce, culture, and administration. Even in their art and culture, Sumer's legacy endured. The rich visual traditions of Sumerian sculpture, pottery, and metalwork influenced the artistic styles of subsequent civilizations. Babylonian and Assyrian art, while distinct in style, often drew inspiration from the iconography and techniques developed by Sumerians. This cultural diffusion was not limited to the visual arts, but extended to religious practices, mythology, and literature. The Epic of Gilgamesh, one of Sumer's greatest literary achievements, became a foundational text for later cultures. Inspiring stories of heroism and divine intervention, that would shape the literary traditions of the region. Ultimately, the legacy of Sumer was not one of isolated achievement, but of enduring influence. As the Sumerian city-states declined, their ideas, technologies, and cultural innovations lived on, seamlessly woven into the fabric of the empires that rose in their place. The Sumerians, in laying the foundations for writing, law, and urban development, helped shape the course of history in the ancient Near East, ensuring their cultural impact would echo through the ages. Sumer's lasting legacy can still be seen today in many aspects of modern life, particularly in the fields of language, governance, and technology. The Sumerians were among the first to develop systems that laid the foundation for much of what we now take for granted in our daily lives, and their influence has permeated throughout history, shaping the structures of contemporary societies. One of the most enduring contributions of Sumer is the invention of writing. The cuneiform script, created by the Sumerians around 3200 BCE, is considered the first form of writing. It enabled the recording of laws, commercial transactions, religious texts, and historical events. This system of writing was adopted by successive civilizations in the region, including the Akkadians, Babylonians, and Assyrians. Today, the concept of written language and the ability to communicate through written symbols are fundamental to human interaction. The principles of writing and record-keeping established by the Sumerians continue to influence modern documentation practices, legal systems, and communication methods. Sumer's governance systems also continue to reverberate through time. The development of bureaucratic structures and administrative systems, pioneered by the Sumerians, allowed for the efficient management of resources, the collection of taxes, and the organization of labor. These practices have evolved but remain essential in today's governments, corporations, and institutions. The Sumerian Code of Ur-Nammu, one of the earliest known legal codes, emphasized justice and fairness, laying the groundwork for the legal systems we rely on today. The principles of law, justice, and the rule of law that were established in Sumer can be traced through to modern legal systems, forming the basis of contemporary judicial practices. In the field of engineering and technology, Sumerian innovations in irrigation and architecture continue to impact modern society. Their advanced understanding of irrigation allowed them to harness the waters of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers to support agriculture, an achievement that led to the development of the first urban civilizations. Modern irrigation practices, especially in arid regions, owe much to the techniques developed by the Sumerians. Additionally, their architectural feats, such as the construction of ziggurats, have influenced architectural styles throughout history, including the construction of monumental structures in later civilizations. The Sumerians were also pioneers in astronomy, mathematics, and timekeeping. Their base 60 numerical system, still in use today for measuring time 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, demonstrates their sophisticated understanding of mathematics. Their efforts to measure time and map the stars set the stage for later advancements in astronomy and physics, which continue to shape our understanding of the universe. Despite the fall of Sumer, its innovations and ideas have had a lasting influence on cultures and societies around the world. From the foundations of writing and law to the structures of modern governance and scientific inquiry, Sumer's contributions remain an integral part of the fabric of human civilization. The Sumerians may have lived millennia ago, but their legacy is alive and well in the systems, practices, and technologies that shape our lives today. Modern archaeological efforts to rediscover the ancient civilization of Sumer have provided remarkable insights into one of the world's earliest and most influential cultures. The excavations that have taken place over the past 2 centuries have unearthed not just physical remnants of the Sumerian cities, but also clues to their way of life, their innovations, and the lasting impact they have had on human civilization. One of the most significant archaeological sites in the search for Sumer's history is the ancient city of Ur, which was once a bustling metropolis in southern Mesopotamia. Excavations in the early 20th century, spearheaded by British archaeologist Leonard Woolley, revealed spectacular finds, including the Royal Cemetery of Ur. These graves contained lavish treasures, offering a glimpse into the wealth and status of the Sumerian elite. The most famous discovery from these excavations was the Standard of Ur, a wooden box decorated with mosaic panels depicting scenes of war and celebration. This artifact has become an iconic symbol of Sumerian art and the social stratification within their society. In addition to Ur, the city of Eridu, considered by the Sumerians to be their first city, has also been extensively excavated. Eridu was a major religious center and is believed to be the home of the earliest known temple, dedicated to the god Enki. Excavations at this site have uncovered layers of ancient structures, showing how the city evolved over millennia. The discovery of the ziggurat of Eridu, a massive stepped temple, sheds light on the Sumerians' religious practices and their architectural prowess. The ruins of the city of Uruk, another key Sumerian city, have also been the subject of numerous archaeological digs. Uruk is famously associated with the legendary king Gilgamesh, and it is here that some of the earliest forms of writing, in the form of cuneiform script, were found. The discovery of thousands of clay tablets inscribed with this early writing system has revolutionized our understanding of Sumerian culture and administration. These tablets record everything from legal contracts and economic transactions to literature and myths, offering a direct window into the intellectual and everyday life of the Sumerians. Recent discoveries in the ancient city of Lagash, located in the southern part of modern-day Iraq, have further expanded our knowledge of Sumerian society. Archaeologists have uncovered a series of well-preserved statues, including those of the famous king Gudea, which depict the king in a posture of devotion to the gods. These sculptures have provided a deeper understanding of the religious and political landscape of Sumer, highlighting the close connection between divine favor and political authority. Through these ongoing excavations, archaeologists continue to piece together the puzzle of Sumer's rich history. The artifacts, city ruins, and texts that have been uncovered help illuminate the complexities of Sumerian society, offering insights into their innovations in governance, science, and culture. Each new discovery brings us closer to understanding the world of the Sumerians and the profound legacy they left behind. The Sumerian civilization, often regarded as the cradle of human civilization, continues to captivate scholars, archaeologists, and enthusiasts alike. Its legacy, woven into the very fabric of modern societies, remains an enduring testament to the ingenuity and cultural depth of one of the first great civilizations. From their pioneering advances in writing and law to their innovations in mathematics, architecture, and governance, the Sumerians laid the foundations for much of the world that followed. What makes Sumer's legacy so remarkable is its far-reaching influence on successive cultures, some of which would come to dominate the ancient world. Their development of cuneiform writing, for instance, was the first true written language and would influence languages for centuries to come. The systems of law they established, including the famous Code of Ur-Nammu, provided a model for future legal frameworks, and their complex bureaucracy inspired the administrative systems of empires like Babylon and Assyria. Through their advancements in agriculture, they demonstrated the importance of organized irrigation and surplus management, setting the stage for agricultural revolutions in later civilizations. Moreover, Sumer's religious practices and pantheon of gods had a profound impact on the spiritual landscapes of the ancient Near East. The gods of Sumer, particularly those of the Mesopotamian pantheon, would influence the mythologies and religions of cultures spanning millennia. Sumer's ziggurats, towering structures dedicated to the gods, became iconic symbols of divine and royal authority, influencing architectural designs in civilizations as far-reaching as the Babylonians and Persians. But perhaps most intriguing is the fact that Sumer's influence is still felt today, even though their civilization faded into history more than 40 years ago. Modern systems of writing, mathematics, and timekeeping owe much to the Sumerians. The base 60 system they introduced for measuring time has endured in the form of our 60-second minute and 360-degree circle. The Sumerian calendar laid the groundwork for the complex timekeeping systems that regulate our lives today. In addition to their technical innovations, the Sumerians' intellectual pursuits and rich cultural achievements continue to inspire generations. Works like the Epic of Gilgamesh stand as early masterpieces of literature, exploring themes of mortality, friendship, and the quest for meaning. The Sumerians' ability to confront universal questions about existence resonates with us still, showcasing their deep philosophical and emotional engagement with the world around them. Sumer's place in the grand narrative of human history is undeniable. While the civilization itself may have fallen to the rise of new empires, its intellectual and cultural contributions remain an indelible part of our shared heritage. The continuing fascination with Sumer is not merely an academic pursuit, but a recognition of the profound role it played in shaping the course of human civilization. As we continue to learn from and reflect upon their achievements, we honor the eternal legacy of the Sumerians and their remarkable contributions to the world we live in today.